Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Had a Quirk Research Partner. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. I had to pinch myself again to believe it. But I still found it hard to believe, even as I stood in front of the tall gate. The letters UA at the entrance of the building inside returned my disbelieving stare stoically. So, I had reincarnated into the world of MHA after all. Or should I say, I skied. I cackled to myself as I started walking away from the building, unable to believe my fate. I hadn't thought this would happen when I woke up as a kid with the quirk, Erkin. Hell, the first few days had been really difficult for me to digest as I got used to my new body and my new abilities. And my new family too, I guess. But once I actually saw the news and noticed them talking about All Might, I had to take a long pause. A really long pause. Simply because I could not believe it. When I saw All Might, I had to ask myself if I had been born at just the right time at the right place, etc. You know, like they show in iSky anime. Was I going to be able to end up enrolling at UA with Midoriya and company? No, wait. Before that, does UA actually exist in this world? And that was what brought me to my current situation. I could not believe that the high school actually existed. I also could not believe when I saw Midoriya enrolled at the same middle school as me. Would you call that a twist of fate? Probably not. Not in this case. In fact, it almost seemed like fate was playing straight with me and being as tropey as possible. Yo, Haru. I turned to the voice that had called me as I grinned. Oh, hey, Izuku. I wasted no time at all making friends with the main character of the show as soon as I realized what was going on. Midoriya Izuku was a stubborn, but a really, really underconfident person in the beginning of the show. Not having friends that support you can do that to you. While I did admire his stubbornness and drive to be a hero, I found his underconfident attitude really annoying in the show. If I can change it right now, well before the beginning of the show, why not? If anything, based on all the information I knew now, I was very well aware that the sludge monster incident was going to happen within the month. I did not plan on interfering with the plot yet. It was too soon to… Oh wait. Making Izuku confident before he met All Might was already interfering, wasn't it? It was, but I believe it's quite minor. Back before my reincarnation, I was very into fanfictions. Especially the reincarnated ones. Ones where a real-world fan of the show incarnates into said show. And he tries not to interfere, so he can use his foreknowledge to progress in the world himself. I always found that tropey and predictable. Why would you do that? You have been given a second lease to your life, and you are wasting that time pandering to the main plot of the show. What an utter waste of that second life. Well, I wasn't doing things much different either. My presence did change and affect a lot of the plot, especially since I was going out of my way to chat with the main character. But I wasn't doing anything that affected the plot massively. Yet, I was just waiting till we Izuku and I get into UA. Then, I will start changing the plot. I did heavily consider whether I should or not reach out to Izuku before I actually did. There were so many of the amazing fanfics I had read that I wanted to see if they could be replicated. But after a decent amount of pondering, I decided that I would change things only after getting into UA. You see, the author of the manga came up with some extremely unique and attractive character designs for the main girls of the show. It'd be terrible of me if I didn't actually appreciate them in this world, where I could actually meet them and interact with them. Interact with Momos, if you will. No judgments, but hers was the best design. It'd be terrible if I didn't get a chance to interact with her. But that's a story to be told at a later date. At the moment, I was building rapport with the overanalyzing nerd that Izuku was. How many times do you plan to see UA before you feel satisfied? The green-haired kid asked as he came up to me. I still can't believe that this school exists. It always has though. Oh, how I wished I could make him understand. But I couldn't. Who in their right mind would believe in reincarnations, even if the world was as quirky as this one was? I simply chose to change the meaning of my words. I meant, isn't it unbelievable that a school exists that actually produced someone like All Might? Don't you feel like if we get in here, it will be worth everything we have been working for? Oh, I get it. Izuku nodded as he too stared at the gate. I hope we do get in. I eyed him curiously. So much progress in such a short time of 2 years that I had known him. I thought it was only a main character trope thing. But no, the boy was genuinely talented. The constant bullying and quirklessness was what had undermined his self-esteem and confidence. He was nowhere close to the level he would be near the end of the manga, but damn, his stutter was long gone, and he no longer flinched at every little sudden movement around him. Also, His bulking up must have massively helped his confidence. He wasn't a walking broomstick anymore. I was glad I convinced him to start a training regimen. How do you think someone becomes a hero? I had asked him. Is it because of their quirk? No. It's because of their drive to improve themselves and their quirks to the point of usefulness. It's because of their endless motivation to be helpful to the people around them. Who says you have to have a quirk to be helpful to people? You can always help in small ways that mean something to people. Stop dreaming like a little kid and start working towards your dream. Midoriya Izuku. Who cares if others laugh at you for it? Even if you fail to be a hero, you will thank yourself in the future. A few more emotionally charged speeches like that, and he had started his regimen. Because main characters can't be reasoned with logic, only with emotions. Apparently. I had to admit that it had been extremely effective. He was already developing 4 packs on his belly. He was definitely going to have a dashing body by the time we would apply to Yua. Of course, we will get in, I responded to his statement with a snort. The entire reason I come here often is to motivate myself. I often lose motivation, so I need something like this. That much was true. My reincarnation wasn't going to give me a new personality. It was the same darn thing. I considered it to be a good thing. The only difference was that my confidence was through the roof ever since I discovered and honed my quirk. Having inhuman abilities like quirks really gave a huge boost to my self-esteem. Let's go, Izuku said with a smile as he turned away. The final exams are next week. And then we have to prepare for US entrance exam. Of course, let's go. As we walked away, I snickered to myself. My impatience was really getting to me. I couldn't wait till the fateful day when the gears would turn. That would be the day I would start changing the plot. I would be the catalyst to make him a real hero. And it finally happened. A couple weeks later, Izuku came up running to me, screaming my name like I owed him money. Haru, listen, Haru. Yeah, what is it? I asked with a sigh as I put fingers to my ears. I had no idea what to expect from him, but given the excitement in his voice, I was certain it would be a big deal. I glanced at him with a hint of curiosity. And you don't have to be so loud. You won't believe what happened today. The green-haired kid almost yelled, shaking me rather hard. He didn't even bother to listen to what I had just said. That said, his next words made me forget the issue altogether. I met All Might. I feigned shock for a moment. I was baffled to regain my composure. I watched him for a moment as he returned my look with sparkles in his eyes. Nah, no way, I said eventually, mostly to confirm that it was actually true. You are kidding. I am not. Check this out. He pulled out his half-burnt quirk book, as I called it, and showed off the autograph. Do you believe me now? No fucking way. I tried in vain to suppress my excitement. You actually did see him. See, I told you. And you know what? The kid was full on crying without hesitation. He said, I can be a hero too. That was it for me. It was one of the most momentous scenes of the manga for me. And Izuku had said the exact words. I laughed as I returned the book. All right, you got me there. I believe you. What will you do now? Izuku opened his mouth for a second, before closing it shut again. He looked ridiculously uncomfortable as he replied. Well, I can't tell you everything, but I will be training with All Might. Huh? Props to my acting, I guess. Izuku flinched like he had been struck. It had been a long while since he did that. I observed him, not speaking anything, waiting to see how much he divulged. As unusual as it is, many people are generally uncomfortable with complete silences. Therefore, many try to fill it in by giving away more information. I wondered how much Izuku would tell me, his close if not best friend. At length, he said, I can't tell you everything. Yeah, you already said that. I know. But I at least didn't want to hide from you that I was actually going to regularly meet All Might. Ah man, such naivety. I remember when such naivety bit me in the ass in my previous life. I genuinely hoped he would be more secretive with the information he would get his hands on in the future. I decided to play with him a bit more. I raised an eyebrow at his statement. Okay, that's hard to believe. I could give you the benefit of doubt before. But All Might, the #1 hero, wants to take some time out of his already busy schedule to hang out with a kid he has not known for long. That's hard to believe. Oh, I was gushing in my mind all right. I just needed to push Izuku to let me meet him. Getting a chance to meet the legend in flesh. No way was I missing out on that. Even if I was going to see him every day about a year from now. I can't. Tell me. Yeah, I know. But you can't just drop that bomb on me and expect me to accept it without question. Izuku squirmed in his place as he tried to come up with a reply of some sort. At length, he just barely threw out. Just accept it. I eyed him for another moment, before sighing. All right. I watched with a twinkle in my eye as he relaxed. Only if you let me meet him. Huh? What? I asked, amused. If you want me to simply accept that you will be training with All Might, you will have to let me meet him. That's the least you can do. I can't guarantee, but I will ask him. All right then, let's go. Oh yeah, finally, the plot is starting. The main story is underway, and I am here to mold it to my fantasies. You are All Might. He is. As unbelievable as it is, Izuku replied with an uncomfortable chuckle. I knew, of course, that this bony person with black eyes was All Might. I knew that right from the day I was born in this world and found out about his existence. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could prepare me for the stark difference between his bony and his buff forms. The anime and the manga did not do it justice. The man looked positively starving and malnourished in his bony form, like he was practically on his deathbed. The only reason that last part didn't seem to be true was because of how active he could be even in that form. Meanwhile, his buff form positively radiated energy and hard work. Like the man had truly given his life to the swole god. Like he spent 24/7 365 in a gym, lifting weights and breaking machines. But I petered out. I honestly had no idea what to say. Don't worry about it, All Might said rather gently. Just know that the usual muscular form you see is because of my quirk. I know that, man, I thought to myself. But I can't tell you that just yet. Instead, I simply shook my head and stared at him again. So, you are going to be training Izuku here to prepare him for Yua. I noticed the inconspicuous exchange of glances between the two. It did not take much for someone in my shoes to know what was going on. All Might cleared his throat before responding. Yes, he helped me with a villain I was chasing. This is my way to pay it back. The two were really sweating buckets as he replied. Man, oh man, both of them sucked at lying. Well, in this case, it was technically true. Exact circumstances aside, it was true that Izuku had helped All Might walk the talk. If anything, I was surprised at the partial truth they gave me. Nonetheless, I could only laugh afterwards. The two seemed confused when I laughed. Well, All Might did. Izuku was afraid. Probably because he knew I had figured something out. I laughed in my mind. Don't worry, kiddo. I have figured everything out, I spoke in my mind. But of course, I wasn't going to tell him that out loud just yet. Instead, that's a lie, I said flatly as I stared at All Might. And I am not stupid. You expect me to believe that the #1 hero repays favors like those with personal training regimens when he has another bunch of villains to take care of? Watching them shit bricks figuratively was rather hilarious. But I did not want to push my luck any further than necessary. I needed both of them to trust me after all. I sighed and shook my head in disappointment. I don't know what you two are hiding, but it must be pretty important if it means All Might is training you himself, Izuku. I won't pry, but it was not fair to lie to me. I am sorry. He apologized immediately. I simply waved away his apology. I don't mind you wanting to keep things private to yourself. But don't lie to someone who has been helping you for the last couple of years without expecting anything in return. It's not fair to them, and it reflects poorly on you. I am sorry. I am really, really sorry. I stared at his bowing form for a moment, before sighing yet again. Well, whatever. I hope your new training regimen is even more effective on you than what we were doing. See you around. As I left, I couldn't stop the grin forming on my face. I had been curious ever since I realized what was going on, if I could affect the canon story at all, and how much. Unfortunately for me, most of the canon story would happen in Yua. So, I had thought I wouldn't be able to know anything till then. Imagine my surprise and excitement when I realized I was in the same middle school as Izuku. That was when my interest in this world renewed. And now, only 10 months remained till the real story started. Until then, I was going to train my quirk like hell. Get ready for me. Yua. 8 months later, I was stunned when Izuku came up to me and told me he had been to Yua. That hadn't happened in the canon. My shock must have been really evident as Izuku smirked at me rather proudly. Ha, that took you by surprise, didn't it? I had to ask. How did you convince All Might to do that? His proud form slightly deflated as he looked away in shame. By, breaking my bones. I blinked in surprise before chuckling. You don't mean that literally, do you? Actually, I do. Izuku came clean to me, much to my surprise. I tilted my head, as if trying to comprehend what he had just told me, before straightening up. And how did you end up doing that? Well, let's just say All Might wanted to test me after all the training we did. Izuku paused, almost as if he was wondering if he was doing the right thing. And I failed that test. And broke my arms. Had to go visit Recovery Girl, remember, I told you about her before. I immediately understood what had happened. One for all. Looks like forcing Izuku to train had made his body mature faster to use OFA. Or so All Might must have thought. No wonder something odd like this happened. But I was snickering to myself anyway. After all, this confirmed for me that I can definitely affect the story, and that it'd have a permanent effect. It would be interesting to see how much I could force the story to skip, and how badly it would affect Izuku. I mean, at the end of the day, Izuku needed some of the interactions in the manga to progress with his quirk control. I could replace those interactions with myself, but I couldn't be everywhere. And frankly speaking, despite claiming to want to be a catalyst to Izuku's progress, I also had some other important things to do, like networking and creating a foundation to be free. Free from society, like the truly wealthy people are. That required a lot of build-up up front, so I could execute it all at once and reap all the benefits. I nodded at Izuku. I am guessing she healed you. Yeah, Izuku replied with a firm but enthusiastic nod. And I even got to meet some other pro-heroes like Eraserhead and Vlad King, and even the principal of UA. I laughed at his enthusiasm. And I hope you told them I am coming to uproot their expectations of heroes. Well, Izuku chuckled. I did tell them I had a rather exceptional friend, intending to join UA. Principal Nezu seemed to know you. He described you accurately. Oh, wow. That actually felt creepy to me. I knew that the mousy bastard had been portrayed in an oddly omniscient way, but being the subject of his extreme intelligence, or whatever he hid behind his smiling face, felt far creepier. I imagine he must have seen you often, Izuku continued as we started walking towards the station. He seems quite eager to meet you. You don't get to see kids this eager to join a school, he says. Sheesh. So much for going under the radar. After a moment of unnecessary bitching, I shrugged. Not much could be done about what had already happened. If anything, it was time to actually really focus on increasing the creative usages of my quirk, so I could blow them all away, and lay the foundation of my future network. Get out of the way, you fucking losers. Ah, there he was. I was starting to wonder if I had scared him away last time we met. It must have taken him aback when someone had managed to actually parry his usual starting explosive move. Ah, Kaken. And Izuku still suffered with stutters against this bane of an ego-fueled humanized superiority complex. Hiya, explosion, I greeted the boy cheerily. I got a glare in return. Try as you might. Extras like you two would never get into UA. Don't worry, Baku-chan, I retorted with a nickname I gave him, and he hated with an obsession. No one here is asking for your opinion. Huh? Ah, Kaken, you can go ahead. I watched in amusement as Izuku intervened and stopped the explosive kid from escalating the little banter to an unnecessary conflict. You better remember to treat me exactly like that for the rest of your lives. Bakugo spat as he walked by. I chose to not respond, seeing as Izuku was pretty much shitting himself. I guess it must not be relaxing to be around someone who actively provokes your bully, and your bully almost always retaliates with a powerful explosion in your face. Once Bakugo was out of earshot, Izuku turned towards me. Can you stop provoking him without reason? Can you stop being such a doormat to him? I retorted. I didn't really mean anything by it. Izuku was going to improve anyway later on. I just needed him to be actually aware of what he was going through was suffering, and not normal friendship. Izuku deflated inside. I try, but Kaken is actually a good. Spare me that, I cut him off, putting fingers in my ears. I've heard that so many times I could actually repeat that even if I died. I'm sorry. I eyed him as we started walking back. Yeah, this is going to take a lot of time. The exam day came soon enough. It was going to be interesting. I was at the gate of UA with Izuku beside me. In canon, Izuku was going to finish his training this day, and he had not gotten the chance to test OFA first. But in this timeline, that wasn't the case. I was curious how much it would affect the actual exam. Get out of my way, Deku, airy bastard. Ah, Kaken. I felt an intense sense of déjà vu at the exchange. But I digressed. We moved out of Bakugo's way and let him pass. As he walked past, he glared at both of us. He seemed to glare at me longer than at Izuku. I simply returned his glare with another cheery wave. The action made him huff and turn away. Izuku glanced at me. I shrugged. There wasn't much I could do. There were only so many ways you could react to an angry Pomeranian. As we started following Bakugo, I noticed the familiar love interest of the mech walking behind us. Just like in the original story, Izuku tripped and almost fell down. Are you okay? Yororaka asked as she straightened the flailing Izuku up. It's my quirk. Sorry for stopping you, but it's a bad omen to trip and fall. Yeah. I facepalmed internally. No matter how less your interaction has been with girls, It never got to these levels. Not without social anxiety anyway. On second thought, that made sense when it came to Izuku. Thanks for helping, I smiled at her. May I know your name? It's Uraraka. I am Korai Haru. You can call me Haru. And this is my friend Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you too, she replied with a smile. Are you here for the hero course as well? Yep. See ya there in the exam hall. I gave her a competitive smile as I held up a fist. We are going to be a tough competition, so be ready for a fight. She responded in kind as she bumped fists. Good luck to both of you. It's not going to be easy. I glanced at Izuku as we went our separate ways, and almost burst out laughing at his expression. It was so much funnier than what was drawn. I couldn't wait to see his all-might face. The topic had never come up, unfortunately, so I hadn't had a chance to see it so far. But I could bet my second life that it would tickle my funny bone just fine. After the orientation with Present Mike, I found out rather suspiciously that I was assigned to the same site as most, if not all, of the future 1A. I had always found that dubious, and it was never explained in the manga. But I had to wonder if Nezu had a hand in the way everyone was distributed. Otherwise, how could it be that more than 90% of 1A would be at the same site? I waited for the inevitable and unexpected begin from Present Mike, as I watched Izuku flinch and get scolded by Ida. Sometimes, it was good for him to suffer. I was not always going to be around to smooth out things for him. He might as well learn it all from his time of less than 1 year at this school. Begin. There it was. I moved immediately. With the way my quirk worked, it was extremely easy to destroy the robots. In fact, I could probably destroy them all without having to move. But I had not yet learned how to discern the robots from living things, so it could get dangerous. Lethal even. And my accuracy from afar was lower than what I'd like. I would need to touch them to use my quirk in its most powerful and most efficient form. As I ran along, I touched as many robots as I could, creating compressed air bombs with the air inside them. They were robots, man-made. There was no technology currently in the world to make any man-made thing completely and utterly airproof. It was extremely easy to compress the air inside something, move it to spots like limb joints, and let it rip. So of course, I was going to do exactly that. My quirk was aircon. Air control, not air conditioning. And the robots had plenty of openings, letting me create really powerful bombs inside their joints, and disarming them. Izuku, without his control on Ofa, was going to have a lot of trouble with getting points. That much was for sure. Unless he was already good with it and could handle it at 5%. Which I highly doubted. Besides, I was fairly sure Izuku would get in anyway. Nezu definitely knew about him being the heir for Ofa. Of course, he was not going to get out of Ua. No, they would keep him close to avoid letting All for One meet him. As the halftime bell rang, I glanced in the general direction from where I could hear some really loud noises. It was the giant robot. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't aware of where that robot would pop up from, so I had no choice but to watch in consternation as the robot head of the zero-pointer made itself visible quite a distance from me. The fact that I could see it over the tall buildings despite being on the ground really spoke to its height. Well, no big deal. Our good old Izuku with his McPowers and plot armor thick enough to stop missiles would handle it just fine. More or less. Nonetheless, I started running towards the tall robot and generally in the opposite direction of the remaining candidates. I knew about rescue points after all. Just as I reached the location and ran past Ida, who called out to me, I heard the oh-so-familiar sound effect of clothes ripping apart. A second later, a gust of wind hit me and slowed me down as Izuku flew upwards. I glanced there briefly before resuming my run towards Uraraka, who I could see was still looking up in shock. Uraraka. Huh? Haru. This is going to hurt, so brace yourself. As I said that, I created a much smaller compressed air bomb inside the rubble holding down the girl and let it explode. It tore apart the debris and freed her. Go help Izuku. Your quirk cancels gravity, right? Yes. It took her a moment to stabilize herself. That was difficult given the nausea as well as the new wounds my little attack gave her. Then she went and used her quirk on a piece of one of the robots and caught Izuku before he splattered on the ground. I watched Izuku desperately cry as Present Mike announced the exam to be over. I wish I could have used my foreknowledge to help him. But no one would have believed me. No, it's still too soon to reveal what I know. There was also the issue with Aoyama being the traitor. Instead of him, I might be considered one due to the accuracy of my predictions. No, it was too dangerous to reveal the truth about me yet. But believe me when I say, I plan to use my knowledge for some fruitful gains. Gains for myself, of course. Haru. I had to move my phone away from my ear. Izuku could scream really loud when he was excited. What? I passed. I somehow passed that exam. Congratulations, I said, letting excitement seep in my voice. Didn't I tell you I had a feeling you'd pass? You owe me a chocolate ice cream now. Izuku laughed at my words. Fine, you got it. But I actually passed. Did you pass too? Of course, I did, I replied as I glanced at the acceptance letter in my hands. I know I scored a decent number of points, so I was bound to pass anyway. Sheesh, how can you be so confident? Because I know the limits of my power. I heard another laugh. We chatted for some time before deciding to call it a day. I was fairly sure Izuku would want to talk with his mentor more at the moment. Come spring season, and we two stood in front of the door of Wana. What a giant door, Izuku mumbled as we both stared at it. I hope those two are not in here. I didn't need to ask who were the two people he was talking about. Instead, I too focused on the sheer size of the door. There must have been someone with a really tall body studying here at some point during the history of this school. Why else would there be such a tall door for just a bunch of squirts? A quick glance to the side led me to see the yellow caterpillar crawling silently towards the classroom. Man, he was lazy, but good for him, I guess. I looked back up ahead as Izuku opened the door to the bickering of Ida and Bakugo. Blow you to bits. You're awful. Do you really wish to become a hero? Yep, that's the two all right. Ida noticed the two of us and approached us, introducing himself. As Izuku introduced the two of us, I leaned back to see Uraraka walking to us. On the other side, the caterpillar had almost reached the class. Haru, Uraraka exclaimed as she reached the class. Is your friend here too? He is, I replied with a wave of my hand. Who is it? Haru, Uraraka. Midoriya, nice to meet you. As the two talked, I chanced a glance at Bakugo. I almost whistled in astonishment. My man looked pissed. And that was saying something, given the fact that anger was his default state. If you're here to socialize, get out. I eyed Eraserhead as he stood up. Man looked about as exhausted as if he had just run 2 marathons back to back. The eye bags didn't help him look any approachable or friendly. I would have been genuinely surprised if any student ever chose to approach him for anything, if I didn't know better. That said, Shishe, why would you choose to do a job like teaching if you couldn't get yourself to care enough about your students and give it your all? It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. You lot aren't very rational, are you? I raised my hand. It was time to start messing around. He looked me up and down, his expression not changing in the least. Yes. Are you Eraserhead? Eraserhead raised an eyebrow at me. It's very rare to see someone recognize me. How did you? Well, I pointed at Midoriya. I am friends with a hero fanboy. Oi, Midoriya hissed. Even I didn't recognize him. I smiled at Midoriya. But I did. All right, enough with the talk, Eraserhead said, cutting any further conversations off. I am your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Eraserhead, as Korai here stated. He pulled out our gym uniforms from his sleeping bag. Change and get to the grounds. We are testing your quirks. After a swift explanation about the freestyle education, as we made our way to the ground, he handed a softball to Bakugo and instructed him to throw it as far as he could with his quirk. Bakugo, being Bakugo, followed through with his usual yell of die. The dumbfounded look on all other students was something to be seen and laughed at. Next came the fake threat of expulsion. I glanced at Momo, noticing her rather careless look, while all others seemed to be losing their shit. She might have felt my eyes, for she suddenly glanced towards me. The eye contact lasted only briefly, before Aizawa started calling students to perform. Before he did though, I raised my hand once again. My action seemed to irritate the hero, as he annoyedly glanced at me and said, yes? I had to wonder yet again why this guy was in a teaching position of all places. Really why? He was not approachable. His teaching methods were geared towards making it easier for him, rather than grading students fairly. And he was taking full advantage of freestyle education for his own benefit. Well, that last one made for not so boring classes. But still, I put my thoughts aside. The performance was the priority, so I posed him the question I had. How many times are we allowed to use our quirks during the tests? Once any time, or as many times as necessary to perform the best. The latter, the hero answered curtly. Any more questions? Seeing as there were none, we started with the tests. Well, after the threat of expulsion had sunk into the students' brains. Event 1. 50-meter dash. I came in under the average with a time of 4.65 seconds. Reducing air resistance. Oh wait. Removing air resistance has its benefits, especially when combined with minor explosions that propel me faster with every jump. Event 2. Grip strength. Nothing to be done there. My quirk was useless for that one. 70 kilograms it was. Event 3. standing long jump. Not easy to beat. I came second, after Bakugo. Event 4, side steps. Nothing again. Event 5, throwing. I grinned to myself. Now, this one was my strength. And Uraraka's too, I suppose. This test was the major reason I had even asked my question originally. When my turn came, I threw it quite like Bakugo did. The ball arched fast and high, and surprised pretty much everyone. I wasn't sure why they were surprised. Surely, they must have seen me in action back during the practical entrance test. Nonetheless, I focused on my next step. That was important to really establish myself as one of the strongest people in the class. I swiftly calculated the path of the ball and created a perfectly sized air cannon, like a tilted tornado right in its way. It wasn't visible directly to the naked eye simply because of its height from the ground. As such, to others, it looked like the ball suddenly changed directions while falling and shot straight up and ahead like a bullet. Next was using my fingertips to sense the path of the ball and continue doing so. At this point, the ball was no longer visible. I could hear the other students mumbling and whispering, wondering what I was doing. Unfortunately for them, only Izuku knew the answer to that. And Bakugo, I suppose, could deduce it. That one knew me surprisingly well, all things considered. He often let on that he knew more about me in his usual outbursts, and I had been genuinely surprised at that when I had first heard from him that he thought I had a broken quirk. I was honestly still not sure about it myself, but if anyone considered my quirk, they would have immediately pegged range as a drawback, simply because the volume of air, even within a cubic kilometer, was a lot to analyze and/or use. Imagine my surprise when I could very well sense things on the other side of the planet if I isolated a small string of air from its surroundings and used that to reach out all the way there. That essentially meant my quirk had no drawbacks. And Bakugo had picked up on that way sooner than Izuku. In fact, Izuku still hadn't even an inkling. That brought a major concern to light. Was my reincarnation not just some random bullshit, but a planned event? Not unlike the main character in Mushoku Tensei. I was curious, but I had no way to investigate that at the moment. The best way to get there where I could actually start investigating were two things. A hero license to use and test my quirk whenever and wherever I pleased, and a research license to have a free access to in-depth quirk studies all the way back from when quirks first appeared. I had a plan. I was just executing it at the moment. And execution involved performing well in this stupid test. It must have been quite long since Aizawa seemed to be muttering something. I blocked him out since I needed to focus on the ball after all. Once I felt it cross the halfway mark around the globe, I switched directions and started pulling the ball towards me through a combination of air cannon and removing air resistance. Removal of air was necessary. It made all calculations way easier and straightforward. Soon enough, I straightened up and finally opened my eyes. I had closed them once the ball was out of sight. Everyone followed my line of sight and saw the ball fling downwards towards us. The ball dropped to the ground and slowly rolled to a stop right by my feet. I took a deep breath and turned towards Aizawa. 40K and change, I believe? And that was indeed the case. Aizawa actually managed to look impressed. Very, very impressive, kid. Extremely creative use of your quirk. I try, I said with mock modesty as I walked away to hoots and cheers. And suppressed swears and explosions. As soon as I reached Izuku, I asked, "How long did I take?" "About 55 minutes, Izuku replied as we watched Uraraka go ahead. "Almost 10 minutes faster. The ball must have gone like Mach 30 or something." "That's ridiculous. How did you even keep the ball from flying off into space?" I was about to answer when the usual rage-filled bark from the class's angry Pomeranian interrupted me. "What was that, you airy bastard? What did you do?" I snorted as I turned towards Mr. King Explosion Murder. "And why'd I tell you that?" Some of the others suppressed their mirth as Bakugo launched into another spiel of swear words. Never in my life had I seen a person with so many anger management issues. It was a wonder Yue even let him in. I figured mental stability of potential heroes was not considered at all. If it had even the slightest weightage, Bakugo would have surely fallen in ranks like a solid piece of iron in water. Next was Izuku's throwing, which left Bakugo speechless. The look of shock on his face was worth it. I heavily considered buying a camera just for capturing those expressions. It would probably be well worth the money. "Sensei," I glanced at Izuku, who had his fist held up with a broken finger, a pained smile on his face. "I can still move." I held back a grimace when I saw the broken finger, and how black the wound was turning slowly. It would require immediate treatment. Thankfully, Recovery Girl existed and healing quirks were a thing. But yeah, I could see how Izuku was at risk of losing his arms at some point. Some common sense could go a long way. He didn't always have to punch harder. But hey, let's take things one at a time. Just then. What the hell? Explain yourself, Dek. Aizawa's carbon fiber scarf stopped Bakugo before he could devolve into another spiel. The glare from the Quirk eraser managed to send chills down my spine. He could genuinely look terrifying if he wanted to project that image. Imagine being a no-name villain, and you are faced by a hero whose glare stops you in your tracks. Scary. Stop using your quirk already, Aizawa muttered. I'm getting dry eye over here. I chuckled despite myself as I went close to the caught Bakugo. Don't worry, Eraserhead. I will hold him. Huh? You think? I really should have put him on a leash back in middle school. I grabbed a bunch of his hair and brought his face close to mine. A condescending smirk made its way on my face. If you don't shut up, I'll make sure you will never be a hero. Asshole, you think you? Do you want to test me? One good thing that I did right from the moment I met them was to make sure to never make empty threats around Bakugo. It was precisely for moments like this where him listening to me was imperative, and for me to assert my dominance. I chuckled at the latter thought. For what it was worth, Bakugo actually did listen to me and stayed quiet, if only angry and glaring, as Aizawa released him. He continued glaring at Izuku in disbelief as the remaining tests happened. I could understand his confusion. He didn't know about the connection between Izuku and All Might just yet, and I had no plans to deal with that bullshit just yet. Also, I was lying about expelling someone. Pin drop silence. It was a rational deception to make you all perform your best. Wame. Well, of course, it was a lie. Didn't take much to figure that out. I idly glanced at Yaoyorozu, who had spoken, just in time to see her glance at me. This time, I didn't avoid her eyes. Instead, I quirked an eyebrow at her. She approached me. You knew about that as well, didn't you? I simply shrugged. I saw how well most students here performed during the entrance test. I was fairly confident no one would be expelled. Wait, you knew? Izuku said accusingly as he too joined us. You should have told me. Would you have believed me over someone who actually has the authority to expel us? I asked with a laugh. Izuku squirmed, figuring out my point. But still, it would have reassured me a bit, he replied at length. Perhaps. I shrugged again. Then I pointed towards his finger. Get that sorted out before it worsens. Yeah. You coming? I will see you at the gate. Right now, I want to chat with our classmates. All right. See you there then. I waved goodbye to Izuku, before turning towards Yaoyorozu and extending an arm. Nice to meet you. Korai Haru. Call me Haru. Yaoyorozu Momo, she replied in kind, shaking my hand. Nice to meet you too. I didn't realize you knew him. We are old friends. We go way back. Or so I'd like to say. I have known him for 4 years. That's a long enough time, she said, amused. It is, I agreed with a grin. But not long enough to say way back. We were already on our way to the changing rooms, so I told her we could talk afterwards. I waved her goodbye and entered the male changing room where most of the others had already changed. To my surprise, Mainta was a student here. I had always thought he must have cheated somehow to get into UA because otherwise, how did he even get in with his stature and his quirk, and without any recommendation? Well, I figured, this was the chance to know. I approached him and poked his ball hair. Hey, what is it? He turned and glared at me. I held up my hands in mock surrender. Hey there. Just curious, how did you get into UA with your quirk? I happened to notice you during the exams throwing your ball hair around. What, are you here to make fun of me too? No, I am just curious. Because if I had your quirk, I would not be able to use it as effectively as you did. I mean, you got into UA. Those compliments seemed to soothe him right down, and he explained how his quirk worked before elaborating on his exam strategy. So, now that we know my quirk is just sticky balls, he threw a pointed glare at Kaminari, who simply held up an apologetic hand. I couldn't really disarm the robots. But you know what the exam instructions said? They said we had to disable the robots. And my quirk is perfect for that. All I had to do was lure the robots in traps set with my sticky balls. I was genuinely impressed. Disabling someone from moving completely, including robots as large and powerful as the ones we were fighting. That was a terrifying quirk in the hands of an intelligent person. And Mainta was intelligent. But he was also ridiculously unconfident, and prone to be laid back when in an advantageous position, not unlike the hare from the tortoise in the hare story. That's impressive, I said honestly. No wonder you made it to UA. I really wouldn't have. Hey, I glanced at Ida who had spoken. Haru, I offered. Haruku. Just then, the door opened, and in walked Izuku, looking oddly tired. Oh, Midoriya-kun, Ida greeted with jerky movements, as he walked to Izuku. Is your finger okay? Yeah, it's fine. Recovery girl's quirk drained me though. Yo, Izuku. I beckoned him over as I changed into the UA uniform. So, how's the first day? Interesting, he replied as he too changed from his gym clothes. But I'm pooped. I laughed. That's to be expected, what with your bone-breaking quirk, and then recovery girl's quirk. Glad to hear you're doing fine, Ida said as he too joined us. Aizawa-sensei sure had us fooled. He made me think this is how it's at the top, and forced me to give it my all. Such deception. I simply grinned as the three of us made our way out, listening to Ida's musings. This was fun, surprisingly enough. I felt like a kid all over again. Except this time around, my life would be on the line soon enough. As we reached the gate of the academy, I noticed Yayurazu waiting, staring at her watch. Immediately realizing what had happened, I made my way to her. The other three waited while I talked to her. Ah, Haru. I was wondering if you completely forgot. Not at all, I replied with a smile as I pulled out my phone. Just ended up in a heated discussion about today's class. On that note, care to give me your number? It'd be easier to keep in touch if our schedules changed suddenly. Indeed, it will be useful. We exchanged contacts and soon separated, as she apparently had something to do. As she walked away, I couldn't help but glance at her retreating figure, admiring it from afar. Oh, she was beautiful all right. Our dear author knew what he was doing when he created her. And I was here now interacting with her as a real person. Talk about reincarnation being a real sweet deal. You know Yayurazu-san? I turned back to see the three of them had walked up to me. Ida had asked the question. I nodded. Chatted with her after our quirk test earlier. She seemed interested in knowing how I knew that Aizawa-sensei was lying about the expulsion. You knew? Ida exclaimed in disbelief. That was the second time I had got that reaction, first time being Izuku himself. Nah, I replied with a chuckle. I had just seen most of us perform extremely well during the entrance exam and doubted anyone would perform badly in something as simple as that. And if we performed well and were still expelled, well, would you want to be a part of a school that punishes excellent uses of quirks purely because of its freestyle education? Ida understood and started thinking deeply about whatever it was. I swear the guy could read between the lines despite there being nothing between the lines, I thought to myself as we started on our way home. All that said, these people are fun to hang out with. I can't wait to see how much they can change due to my presence and actions to affect the future. The next day was as boring as a regular class. I would have frankly slept through if it wasn't for the fact that I'd need to know at least some stuff for the exams. It was only after lunch that I got interested in the proceedings of the class. I have come through the door like a normal person. I laughed at the ridiculous entrance, while everyone else seemed odd that the number one hero was going to be a teacher there. After he swiftly explained what the class was about, he beckoned me over. Curious, I went to him. Yes. Korei Shounen. Your quirk registry had the costume column empty. I believe you stated that you did not want a costume. May I know why? Ah, so that's what it was, I thought as I smiled. I plan to be an underground hero. A costume that can be attributed to me kinda goes against the idea, doesn't it? But wouldn't you still want to have a costume that can be recognized? Like, say, your homeroom teacher, Eraserhead? Not at all, I replied with a smile. Fame will get in my way. As long as I get compensated for my work. I don't particularly care for fame or recognition. All Might seemed bummed at my words, but the smile never left his face. Interesting thought process, he said anyway. I'd still recommend a costume since they can provide extra protection that your quirk might not be able to provide. Do consider it. Now, go. Let's meet at the ground beta. And with a swift pat on my back, he disappeared. That was manly. I didn't have to turn to know that it was Kirishima. I laughed instead. It's not being about manly. It's about being clear about your goal. And that's manly. Yeah. Let's see what you're made of, you embryos. As All Might explained what the training was going to be, I hazarded a glance towards all my classmates. Mind you, the girls looked awesome. Most of the guys did too. Of all costumes, I'd only really questioned Maita's, which honestly looked like he was wearing a diaper. I had no clue why he would wear something like that, but I chalked it up to it being because of his quirk. Somehow. I would have to ask him later if the design was the way it was because of any special reason. I doubted that, but gave him the benefit of doubt. I wasn't particularly hopeful about the reason, but hey, everyone deserved a chance, as long as they weren't a convicted criminal. It wasn't until lottery drawing started that I realized with a start that there were an even number of people after all, which was strange. I had thought my presence would be additional, not that I'd be substituting someone from the canon. After a long look around, I realized that the invisible girl wasn't in the class anymore. Of all people, somehow, Minta was in but Hakakure was out. Yua badly needed to overhaul their entrance exams. And so, as luck would have it, I got paired with Ojiro as Team I. After the explosive Izuku vs Bakugo match, we were put up against Hero Team B, Todoroki and Shoji. Of fucking course. With a sigh, Ojiro and I made our way to the starting position. I could easily see that the guy wasn't really confident about winning. That made sense. Because honestly, even I was wondering if I could do something. I racked my brain for something airy that I could use to beat them. Since Ojiro and I were villains, we probably were free to do whatever with our bomb. During the 10 or so minutes we had to strategize, I had a chat with Ojiro. So, any plans? I asked, willing to wait and see what the tail guy had in mind. I already had something cooking in my mind, but before verbalizing it, I wanted to see what my partner had in his mind. After all, I couldn't exactly carry the entire class on my back. They wouldn't be ready for the bullshit coming next year, that is, if I am not able to stop it. Hey, I had grown fond of the people here. Not sure honestly, Ojiro replied, his tail swishing. I mean, it's Todoroki. He's a recom. I interrupted his negative verbiage. Let's focus on the task at hand. As villains, we know the hero team's quirks. Can we use that knowledge to our advantage? Let's see. Todoroki's quirk is fire and ice. Shoji's is replicant arms. Ojiro started slowly as I nodded at him. From what we have seen, Todoroki only uses ice. Shoji's tentacles can replicate parts of his body, so he can eavesdrop on us without us knowing. And, yeah, that's about what I know. I put on a thinking expression. I don't know anything more either, I muttered just loud enough for him to hear it. Still, with what we know, we should be able to do something. He seemed surprised. You have something in mind? Yeah, somewhat, I petered out, trying to figure out a way to handle Todoroki. I knew he wouldn't use fire at all, but his ice was dangerous. In Shoji's case, he was simply physically strong. Neither of us were strong enough to take them both head-on. Can you pick up the bomb with your tail? I asked eventually. A bit difficult given the width, but yes, I should be able to, Ojiro said as he glanced over at the bomb. Perfect. I smiled. Then I think we should be able to do something after all. I paused as my eyes scanned his collar. Remove the mic for a second. Eh? Just do it. I don't want my plan to be heard by anyone in the audience either. I grinned, a twinkle in my eye. Ojiro must have noted it, for he did follow my action and removed the mic, curiously staring at me. All right, what is it? When the bell rings, move the bomb to another building ASAP, I instructed. And then stay there. Try to be as discreet and quiet as possible. We don't want Shoji to hear or see you in the other building. In the meantime, I will be removing the oxygen on all the lower floors so the two of them will suffocate. What the fuck? I laughed at his disbelief and concern. Don't worry. I am well aware of the repercussions, so I will make sure they only pass out at most. And that's why I want you to be on the same level as our heroes. In case I overdo it, I want you to keep an eye on them and report their status to me. But stay out of their range at all costs. If they see you while they are hyperventilating, they might try some last-minute, desperate attack. We don't want that now, do we? He mulled over the plan for a few moments. Then, he glanced at me, the worry still clear in his eyes. I am fine with the plan, but I still have to say that it is dangerous. I hope you know what you are doing. I know what I am doing. But I won't be able to see what I am doing, I pointed out. That's where you come in. Take them by surprise if you need to and run away. No need to fight them head-on. They are too strong against us. He nodded in understanding, the apprehension receding from his eyes slightly. As soon as the starting bell rang, we acted. Ojiro took the bomb with him and jumped to a nearby building of the same height. He immediately ran away from the edge of the roof as quietly as he could and entered the building, disappearing from my sight. At the same time, to make sure his actions couldn't be heard, I separated the air in and around the building from the air outside. Having air control as a quirk meant I could quite literally create a vacuum space anywhere as long as it had air in it. And in real world, that meant everywhere. A vacuum bubble formed all around the building, just as I saw the ice freezing the hallway I was in. I jumped, letting the ice form under me before landing on it. Now, the next part was to create another bubble around my enemies, so I could siphon out the air inside. My earpiece crackled, and I heard Ojiro's voice coming through. I see them on the first floor. Shoji is near the entrance and not moving. Todoroki is walking swiftly towards the staircase, and now he's climbing. Got it, I replied. I focused in the area Jiro had mentioned, and formed a large vacuum bubble around where I assumed Shoji to be, and then started siphoning the air out from the bubble. It only took a few seconds before he started feeling suffocated. At the same time, I created yet another vacuum bubble around the staircase entrance of my hallway, waiting for Todoroki. My earpiece crackled again. Shoji is on his knees and seems to be fiddling with his earpiece. Todoroki has just climbed through to 3rd floor. He's now waiting there, listening. He's running back down. Shoji isn't moving. He shouted the last part out, making me wince. I released the second vacuum bubble I had created around Shoji, letting the guy breathe. Todoroki has just reached Shoji. Shoji is waking up, Ojiro reported much more calmly. I supposed he was glad one of his classmates wasn't going to kill his other classmate. This time both of them are moving together. Ojiro continued. All right, ranged attacks from there now, Ojiro, I commanded. I have made sure they can't hear you from that building, so use that to your advantage. Use any sort of rubble you find and slam it their way. We'll continue wasting their time like that. Roger. And that was how Team I won. Ojiro and I coordinated like this, keeping the hero team on their toes, and attacking them either through air or with rubble that Ojiro picked from different buildings. I was genuinely quite surprised to find out that neither of our opponents were all that adaptable. All Might congratulated us when we returned before turning to the spectators, awaiting their insights and opinions. Yayurazu Momo would, of course, be the first. Yes, Yayurazu Shoujo. The MVP in this match would be Haru, she said determinedly. His team was against a team with 2 powerful quirks. Neither of his team had a quirk strong enough to take them head-on. Despite that, Haru devised a plan to use his and Ojiro's quirks differently. There was also the fact that they moved the bomb itself to another building. Villains do not play fair, so this is not a wrong move, and it still ensures that the villain's goals are achieved. I do not know what Haru himself was doing, unfortunately, but it was effective as it prevented Shoji from moving. She took a deep breath before continuing. On the other hand, Todoroki-san depended too much on his ice quirk and did not plan anything. He also did not keep track of time their team lost due to the continuous barrages. But he had excellent quirk control and kept his teammate from freezing, which is a major plus point. In case of Ojiro-san, he used his simple quirk extremely effectively by using his tail to jump from building to building and smash things inside to create his own projectiles, that he then shot at the hero team. Because of his continuous movement, it wasn't easy to pin him down, and as they were in a civilian area, Todoroki could not use his ice quirk too widely, or it could have damaged the other buildings. In case of Shoji-san, she faltered at that point, but her point was made. Excellent insights, Yayurazu Shoujo, All Might said, his smile still plastered on his face, but his voice betraying his disbelief. Now then, Korei Shounen, would you like to explain what you did and how you used your quirk? I glanced around, noting the curious stares I was getting. Todoroki was the only one who looked indifferent, but he was leaning in nonetheless. Izuku, on the other hand, was chuckling quietly, while Bakugo looked uncharacteristically muted. I smirked and glanced at All Might. Not right now. Let them figure it out. My quirk is nothing special. It just requires a bit of thinking on others' part to understand how it works. And I want to keep that secret as long as I can before the intelligent people of the class. I glanced at Momo with a smile, figure it out. All Might laughed as usual, while some of the others groaned. Come on. That's not fair, Mina exclaimed, pointing rather shamelessly at me. How are we supposed to learn if you don't tell us? I just laughed. And pray tell me how you are going to know a villain's quirk when you start working as hero, I said dryly. It's not like you will know a villain's quirk up front when you heed a call for help. All you will have will be clues about how the villain interacts with his surroundings and himself to figure out his quirk and deal with it appropriately. Brilliantly said, Korei Shounen, All Might said as he turned towards his students. As an actual hero, you will rarely know what quirk you are going to face. The only way to figure it out is during a fight. Use this opportunity to figure out Korei Shounen's quirk and see if you get it right. Now then, next teams. Later, I stood outside the nurse's office, silently and inadvertently eavesdropping on the conversation between All Might and Recovery Girl. I had wanted to visit Izuku, but had forgotten All Might would check on him first. As such, I was waiting outside for their conversation to finish. And those two were not taking care of reducing their voices. It was therefore no surprise that I heard Recovery Girl saying this is the disciple you granted your power to. Talk about an excellent way to learn more about everything. I continued waiting patiently, listening, until All Might suddenly walked out. He froze for a moment when he saw me before closing the door. He hesitated briefly before turning towards me. How long were you outside? I shrugged nonchalantly, never breaking eye contact with him. Long enough to have heard this is the disciple you granted your power to. All Might froze, then sweated bullets. She meant it. Oh, it's fine, All Might. I said with a disarming smile that only served to make him sweat harder. I know neither you nor Izuku really want to explain it all, so I won't force you to. But I leaned in towards him to whisper, a huge smirk on my face. It explains why the #1 hero was directly training Izuku. If he was sweating bullets before, he was now sweating an entire waterfall. To think it would look so real in this new world of mine. It was rather disconcerting than funny. He joined his hands and bowed. Please, no matter what happens, do not tell anyone this. It is an extremely confidential secret that must never go out. You have my word, I said inside, before looking at him wryly. Confidential secret, eh? In fact, extremely confidential. So confidential that you just had to say that loud enough for me to hear. All Might coughed and cleared his throat awkwardly. He seemed to want to speak something, but after a moment of consideration, dropped it. Nodding, he repeated his request and left. I imagined he would probably go have a chat with Nezu before leaving. I did not envy him. Chuckling to myself, I entered the nurse's office and nodded at Recovery Girl. She must have known I had come for Izuku as she gestured towards him. Izuku lay there asleep and looking mostly healed. Recovery Girl must have worked her magic. I stared at the unconscious friend of mine before turning towards Recovery Girl. He'll be fine, right? As good as new. She paused for a moment before continuing. But he should really try to not break his bones. I can only heal him so many times. It's not like my power undoes all the damage, you know? I nodded simply and glanced at Izuku once again, before turning back. Well then, I will head back to my class. I did not expect to be greeted as noisily as I was when I walked into the class. When Ojiro and I had returned from our battle, we had already seen the expectant glances, but All Might had been super quick about starting the next match. The time of his buff form definitely did not have anything to do with it. No, sir, it did not. Nonetheless, it was obvious to me that many of my classmates had wanted to say something to me. But before they could, I had run away to check on Izuku first. So, when I returned, I was swamped by them all. I have no idea how you managed to come up with a plan to beat Todoroki and Shoji, Kirishima exclaimed. What is your quirk? Mina asked, beaming. Will you tell us now? Your match got us pumped even more, Sato declared as he came up behind the other two. They swiftly introduced themselves, and I smiled and reintroduced myself. As I did, I noticed Yoyorozu, Todoroki, and Shoji themselves walking towards me. I waved at Shoji. I hope you are fine now. Shoji took that as his cue to enter the conversation. I'm fine. I'm still not sure what you did in the battle, but it was effective in immobilizing me. I simply grinned. What if I tell you I wasn't immobilizing you? Well, you weren't technically, Shoji corrected himself. But you were effective in that direction. I laughed and nodded. I was trying to. Haru, Yaoyorozu called, but before she could say anything, Aizawa-sensei came in and shepherded us back to our seats. I sent her a knowing smile and nodded at her. Let's talk later. After school, I tailed Izuku when he ran from the class in a hurry. This was a good time to get in the know of his secret. As soon as I saw them, I stopped just close enough to hear Izuku stating that he got his quirk from someone else. As he went on talking, I smirked to myself. Also, Bakugo did notice me, but his focus was mainly on Izuku, who finally finished with stating his wish to Bakugo after making the borrowed quirk his own. Bakugo blustered and flustered and cried, and finally said, Enjoy your win. It'll never happen again, damn it. He started walking away, but then paused to stare at Izuku and pointed at me. And you should be careful about who is around. Izuku froze and turned to me. I grinned mischievously and walked to him. So, I started, immensely enjoying Izuku's reactions. Borrowed quirk, eh? I don't know what you're talking about. Shut up. You suck at lying. No, you heard nothing. You really think I can forget what I overheard? Try to. I guffawed and slapped his back, making him take a few steps towards All Might, who was now walking towards us. Bakugo was a distant speck at the end of the street. So, I said as All Might walked within hearing range, judging from what I have overheard so far and seen so far. I paused as I put on a thoughtful expression. In my mind, however, I was laughing my ass off at Izuku's disbelief and concern, and All Might's confusion. Izuku, you have a quirk that's so special that it requires All Might himself to train you. I know you borrowed your quirk, so the most likely chance is that All Might is the one who lent you the quirk. It was an aha moment indeed for whoever had seen and known the same things I had. But for Izuku and All Might, it was the end of the world. All Might cleared his throat. Korei Shounen, what makes you think so? Well, I overheard you before, and now, Izuku as well, I replied honestly. Both of you suck at keeping secrets. or being aware of your surroundings for that matter. The two OFA users exchanged glances before looking back at me again. It stays a secret. I promised them it would. What's it like learning from All Might? Izuku and I were interrupted by one of the reporters standing near the UA campus entrance. I promptly ignored them. Paparazzi was never in my good books, and given the condition in this world, would never be ever. Izuku was trying to excuse himself, but was being entirely unsuccessful. He stood there stammering and stuttering into the mic held in front of him as cameras flashed behind. Shaking my head, I grabbed his collar and pulled him along. The protests of indignance continued as most of the students gave only vague and generic replies, mostly due to not being used to being in front of camera. Ida was the sole exception to that fact. My man managed to bore the reporters through his unceasing rave of the #1 hero. And now that I had seen the media in action, I was impressed. He was giving them their breaking news, and they weren't taking it because of his enthusiasm. Excessive enthusiasm. I could only laugh. Once the UA barrier was down, Aizawa-sensei hounded us towards our classes. I fell in pace beside him as we walked. Hey Aizawa-sensei. What is it, Korai? Will that barrier hold? Aizawa scoffed behind his scarf. That barrier can take even All Might's punches. It won't have a problem against civilians. It can? I asked, interested. How often did you even get to see a material that could withstand those weather-changing punches? Not often, I bet. But it isn't infallible, right? All Might's quirk is physical. But what about flying quirks? They could still fly over the gate, couldn't they? That barrier you saw is just the first level, Aizawa replied in his usual expressionless voice. There are more levels with stronger barriers to take care of quirks like that. Oh, I see. But still, it isn't foolproof, right? There might be quirks that could bypass the entire thing altogether. Perhaps. But it will be handled quickly. We have a lot of pro heroes in this school to take care of any intruder. I chuckled to myself as I nodded at him. He clearly didn't believe me. But hey, I tried to point it out, didn't I? As we filed into our class, a terrifying thought struck me, and I swore under my breath. I had, once again, completely forgotten about the traitor theory. And when the villains would attack, the teachers would be highly likely to suspect me of all people because of my little chat with Aizawa. How incredibly careless and stupid of me. I would have to find a way to deal with this stupidity of mine. For the time being, though, I focused on the class. Aizawa was apprising Midoriya about his quirk's drawback. It took a moment for me to recall, but I remembered this being the time the class president was chosen. Everyone except me raised their hands, the class decorum devolving into the cacophony of a club night out. Everyone had their own reasons to want to be the president, but the most obvious one was that it would give a chance to directly lead other heroes. That made it a coveted position for students that wanted to be the top hero. The top hero. Just like from the manga, Ida suggested voting, and everyone agreed. Later, I raised an eyebrow in surprise when I saw 4 votes next to my name. I had not been expecting any. Izuku had 3, and Momo had 2. Most of the rest had 1. I got 3 votes, Izuku exclaimed from his seat. I'm more surprised I got 4, I said aloud, amused. Why me? What do you mean by that? Ajiro laughed as he slapped my back. What were you expecting after your performance in the battle training? I scoffed. And how does that correlate with my ability to lead someone? I'm fairly sure you were the one leading me back then, Haru, Ajiro stated matter-of-factly. Well, in that case, I got up from my seat and cleared my throat. I, Korai Haru, as the president of 1A, resign from the post and recommend Ida Tenya as the new president. It took a moment for the words to sink in, but the class decorum promptly devolved with everyone stating their disagreements. What do you mean by that? How can you just resign from a post everyone was vying for? That's so unmanly. Uncool, Haru. I expected more. I simply shrugged before sitting down. Why the hell would I want all the extra responsibility? I was perfectly fine being the soldier and letting someone else be my lieutenant. I glanced meaningfully at Ida as I sat. Ida was still staring at me in disbelief as he stood up. Are you sure? He asked. Perfectly. In that case. And that was how Ida and Izuku became the president and the vice president of 1 respectively. I leaned towards Momo, who was on my right. Are you disappointed you weren't chosen? She started and glanced at me before sighing. If this is what the class chooses, then I do not have a choice. Sure you don't, I said dryly. If only she knew. A maddening lunch rush later, where Ida proved his mettle for presidency, I was surrounded by my friends. I had skipped out on going in to avoid the stampede, so I was quite sure what I was going to be asked. Did you know this was going to happen? Izuku asked as we glanced at the last of the reporters being hounded away by the police. You seemed intent on not being in the room. Just a bad feeling, I replied with a shrug. The desperation from the press this morning was disconcerting. It made me wary about being in a closed room with as many people as there are during lunch. Izuku eyed me for a short moment. Well, your intuition has always been pretty spot on, so I am not surprised. And, I said, grinning at Ida first before turning to the others. I guess exit sign Ada proved himself fit for presidency, didn't he? We all laughed before Momo sobered up. She verbalized the thought in everyone's minds. How do you think they got in? The barrier can withstand All Might's punches, but some civilians damaged it so much that it disintegrated completely. It disintegrated? I asked, feigning surprise. Did you see someone? No, but I can see the decay on the metal from here. I considered for a moment if I should speculate some more, but then I decided against it. I had already raised enough flags against me as it was. It'd raise a lot of suspicion if yet another of my speculations or feelings proved to be true. Instead, I shrugged. Well, let's leave it to the pros. I believe Ida and Izuku will have to go check in with Aizawa-sensei first before class. That seems to be the case, Ida agreed with his choppy moves. Now, Midoriya and I must leave. We will see you in the class. And that was that. Until the rescue training class villain attack. In the meantime, I finally decided that a costume was worth it. I would need to discuss it with the support company, but after the initial simulated battle experience, I realized that if I ever faced a quirk like Bakugo's, I wouldn't be able to survive without a costume taking the brunt of the attack. It was necessary. I was glad I realized it sooner. I wouldn't have enjoyed my know-it-all attitude biting me in the ass. To think I was already biting off more than I could chew. I made my way to the support department and was soon redirected to Power Loader. I was surprised to know that he handled most of the support department and its connections. He was the unofficial boss there. He invited me into his office, and we sat down across his desk to discuss in detail about my costume. So, Korai-kun, what do you need in your costume? I leaned back in thought, trying to articulate what I exactly needed. Considering my quirk, I won't need a lot of skin exposed. But I will need my fingertips open. They help me maintain and improve my accuracy, so fingerless gloves for sure. Power Loader said nothing but nodded, noting down what I said. I continued humming in thought. Also, the material to use for my costume has to be fireproof and dustproof. And waterproof. Durable too, in case I ever face an explosive quirk like Bakugo's. The costume should cover me fully except for my face and my fingertips. I paused for a moment. How much will a suit like this weigh? Do you need it to be light? Power Loader asked, instead of answering. He definitely knew what I wanted. As light as possible, I replied with a nod. I want to be able to fly despite wearing my costume. For reference, I can fly with this uniform of Yua. That won't be an issue at all. Does that cover all the quirk-based functionality of the costume? I frowned at the question. I think so. Is there a way to amplify my quirk within the costume? My quirk is air control. My range, when I really push myself, is the entire planet, but that requires concentration that I won't have in active battle. I can create tornadoes too, but again, the same issue. So, if there's a way to amplify my quirk without it affecting me, it'd be awesome. He was gaping at me in disbelief. I looked at him questioningly. What happened? He snapped out of his shock and shook his head. Nothing. Just surprised about the power of your quirk. Ah, yes. Don't worry though. That's the best of conditions. Which is never the case in real world. There was a pregnant pause. Then Power Loader said, I think that can be done. But I will need some full body scans of you to make sure I get your quirk function right. He rifled through his drawer and then held out a yellow card. Take this to Principal Nezu and tell him I sent you. He will know what to do. Got it. I took the card from him and pocketed it. I was about to get up when I realized I forgot the most important thing of the costume. Oh yes, and I would like the costume to be based on black color. The pro hero sent me an amused glance. Black? It's my favorite, I exclaimed even as a smile pulled on my lips. I am particularly fond of neon green and black combo, but I accept any as long as it contrasts well with the black and has a sick design. Abstract designs are fine too. Power Loader laughed as he noted down that as well. Don't worry. Your costume should be ready as soon as you get me your scans. Now get going to the principal. Once I was done with the principal, I left the school. If the timetable was anything to go by, tomorrow would be the villain's attack. I wanted to be well rested to watch the fight of All Might versus Namu in all its glory. After all, how often could you say you got to watch an anime fight in real life? On the fated day, I went to Yua quite a bit earlier and knocked on the principal's door. What I was about to do was definitely and predominantly stupid, but hey, I had to find a way to deal with the stupidity I pulled in the previous chapter. The door opened to reveal the mouse in all his glory. Ah, Korai Haru, how can I help you? I stared at him for quite some time, unable to speak. While I did consider him to be a mouse primarily, the creepy mix of animals that he was made it difficult to stomach the fact that in this life, he was a real entity in front of me. Eventually, I shook my head to keep myself from distracting. Nezu-sensei, I needed to talk to you about something. Go ahead. Not so easily. What I want to tell you is something that I want only you to know. No one else must know, period. The mouse eyed me without any expression on his face. I was not prepared for it, but I actually felt nervous in his presence while he observed me like that. His quirk was not physically dangerous, but that damn rat could kill me with his brain and his ability to manipulate chances in his favor through sheer intelligence. At length, he nodded and pressed a button underneath his table. I heard some noises around me, but nothing changed visibly. Once the noises stopped, he gestured towards me. It must be pretty important if you're coming before school starts and are directly coming to me. I nodded and prepared to reveal myself. But before that, do you read manga? The pin-drop silence was ironically deafening. Was that the important thing you wanted to tell me? The principal finally asked, his voice betraying his disbelief. No, but it's necessary for me to know so I can explain in the right way. In that case, yes. I nodded again, then paused. Would it be best to be blunt? Perhaps. But I had to make sure he would believe me without me having to tell him everything. After another short while, I looked at him in the eye. Well then, I said, keeping my voice extremely serious. I must tell you that I got transmigrated here. If the previous silence had been pin drop, this one was from the quietest room in the world. Neither of us spoke, letting the words hang in the air. I didn't because I didn't want to unintentionally divulge information that could reduce my ability to predict things, although I suppose it was too late now to care. He didn't because. I find that hard to believe. Korai-kun, he said finally. Are you hinting that you transmigrated into this life from a previous life, where if I am deducing correctly this world of quirks existed as a manga or something like that? I nodded, not daring to speak. I needed time to process his words. I find that hard to believe, he repeated again, a paw tapping against his desk. I hope this is not some joke you're making, Korai-kun. While I always make time to teach my students, I do not appreciate my time being wasted. Not in the morning when I am doing most of my work. I chuckled at the veiled threat in his words. Don't worry, Nezu. Do you want me to prove it to you? He eyed me again with those beady, knowing eyes of his boring into my very soul. I will give you one chance since you did say that you wanted only me to know. I nodded, readying myself. Taking a deep breath in, I said a few words. One for all. To say Nezu was thunderstruck would be an understatement, given the rigidity of his body structure. It was for barely a moment, but I could see I had made my point. You could have overheard it, Nezu replied slowly. All Might did mention you had practically figured out what had happened. I could see what he was implying. He was implying that I only figured it out because of that. Fine, I will play that game. I shook my head at him. I didn't overhear the name of the quirk, you see. But more important than even that, I grinned and lowered my voice to a whisper, watching his body language change, is the fact that All for One is still alive. You're not lying, the principal said finally, staring me straight in my eyes. While I still have my doubts regarding the exact information, I know for a fact that that name has been erased from public records completely. I also know you have no relatives that handle top secret info, so there could have been no way you could have known that unless. He leaned back to stare at the ceiling. What you are telling is true. I chuckled as the tension in the room receded. Believe me, it is true. I had wanted to share this burden with someone so I could do something about it. There's only so much I can do alone. I decided to choose you because you don't seem to be the type to use such crucial information for your own gain. He looked at me critically. And do you think I will be the same even now? Now that I know. If you don't, I will kill you, I said straightforwardly. No way am I letting shit like that get out of hand. Both of us sat in silence, letting the words hang in the air. I, for one, could not believe that my mouth had spouted that. Did I just make a death threat to someone who could very well ruin my life in this world? God, how could I be this reflexive and this stupid? So, if you're approaching me today instead of on the first day, he said, as if the exchange before just hadn't happened. I'm guessing something is going to happen today. Yep, I obliged his decision to ignore my threat. Call All Might and tell him to completely ignore any and all calls for help when on his way here. We're going to Usus today for rescue training, right? Nezu nodded, calmly hearing me out. Well, a group of villains will attack today there. They call themselves League of Villains. I paused for a moment. One of them has a warp quirk, so he might try to separate us students from teachers. One of them, called Namu, will have multiple quirks: shock absorption, super regeneration, and some more. That one is an artificially created creature with the sole intention of killing All Might. That's why we want All Might to be there at his full strength, given the reduced time he has. Is this the attack planned by All for One? Yeah, and let's keep the schedule as is. The only people who should know anything are the teachers. I narrowed my eyes at him. And all they should know is that you have intelligence, and not the source of info or anything else. Don't change things other than acting on them in the least obvious way. That way, I will be able to predict things more accurately. I got it. He didn't seem to appreciate being talked to like that, but I had to make sure I made my conditions known. I got up and slung the backpack on my shoulders. That's about what I wanted to say. Let's keep things as they are for now, with the only difference being teachers being ready for shit happening here. I will tell you more after school today to give a full debrief about what's happening. All right. As I left his office to go to the class, I was unnerved. He was definitely taken aback with the info I knew, but our deal was a bit too easy for me. There was no way someone as intelligent as that rat could agree so easily with my demands. Something felt fishy, wrong. But that was just a feeling. What was I supposed to do with just a feeling? I could only grumble as I took my seat in the class. Did something happen, Haru? Surprised, I looked up to see Momo and Shoji. Momo was the one to ask the question. Shoji simply looked up to our voices. Somewhat, I replied vaguely. I can't explain it, unfortunately. Oh, was it bad? Not really. Just concerning. The two eyed me critically, but neither made a comment. It was surprising to me for some reason. I didn't know why I thought they were going to react like Mina would have. In any case, they chose not to say anything and focused back on the door as more people poured in. Later, after I had given a basic idea of what to expect from the approaching attack to Nezu, we sat in the bus that would take us to Usji. I noted the presence of All Might alongside Aizawa. He didn't look particularly tired. I could only presume Nezu had managed to assert the importance of his presence that day. Relieved, I leaned back into the seat, lazily listening to the conversation about everyone's quirks. It was nothing new, but seeing it all happen in front of me was an extraordinary experience altogether. Some quirks, Kirishima's hardening for instance, deformed the body in ways that made me queasy, but overall, seeing it modify their bodies was something I would never be able to experience just from a manga or an anime. Stuff like this was a major reason why I found being incarnated in this world such a lot of fun. Haru. I glanced towards Asui, who had called me. It seemed like it brought everyone's focus onto us. Why? Was she about to point out something curious? Yes, I said, inclining my head in her direction. Your quirk controls air in some way, doesn't it? I blinked in surprise before I could stop myself. My action must have been obvious because Mina and Satu leaned in, excitement evident on their faces. What makes you think so? Because of the way the ball moved in the throwing test, she replied, as straightforwardly and evenly as a person could. It seemed obvious with the way it moved suddenly. She was an observant person, I decided. She pointed out the obvious, of course, but many would have thought that I was controlling the ball, not the air. I asked as much. And what makes you think that I am not controlling the ball? If you were, the moves of the ball wouldn't be so jerky. Fair enough. Wait, Kirishima cut in, looking between the two of us. That doesn't explain it. It does though, I said, cocking my head towards him. I guess, if you actually had the ability to control some object, Momo said as she thoughtfully glanced at us, you would have moved it way more smoothly. There wouldn't be any reason for you to move it the way you did. I pointed at her. That's it. Momo simply smiled. I smiled at everyone. They were all looking at me and raised an eyebrow. Well, with all that information, surely, someone must have figured out what my exact quirk is. Air control? Asui and Momo were the ones to answer. The others, although they didn't answer, seemed to have figured it out anyway. If they hadn't, they wouldn't have deserved to be a part of the top university's top class. At least, that's what I thought. I simply smiled in response. While 13 was explaining everything about the Asji, which, I must admit, was incredibly ridiculously gargantuan, I sneaked a glance at All Might and Aizawa. While there wasn't much to be seen as such, if I looked closely, both of them seemed tense, their senses alert. Yep, Nezu had been thorough all right. Now, the main issue was to see if my prediction would be right or not. Sure, I knew, but my presence could have very well changed things a lot. Butterfly effect and stuff, you know? I was fairly sure though that I didn't have to worry about much just yet. I stood by the railing, staring down near the fountain where their appearance was going to be. There were no real disturbances even as I stared hard and felt with my quirk. 13 continued with his instructions, which I easily ignored. What I couldn't ignore was All Might's shout as he came to a stop beside me, dust flying at his feet. "Corey Shaunen, is something wrong?" he boomed. "You seem to not be paying attention." "Ah, nothing is wrong, All Might," I replied bashfully, suddenly finding myself the center of attention. I was still not used to it. I just had a bad feeling, so I couldn't focus. If my words made the teachers concerned, they didn't show it. But that fake mask could last only a second. The next moment, the air moved. I whipped my face downwards, as did the 3 pro heroes. And just like I had predicted, the black misty warpy substance appeared near the fountain, and Shigaraki, in all his creepy glory, walked out. Well, he only managed a step. Then, air whooshed as All Might appeared in front of them, his punch already landing into Namu's face, right beside Shigaraki. Shigaraki's stunned expression would have been a sight to behold, if not for the amputated hand stuck on his face hiding it. Sheesh, I should have really bought a camera just to take photos of those ridiculous expressions. Everyone could only gape as they watched the number 1 hero already on the move with Eraserhead and 13 following behind. My forewarning must have been really useful, for the 3 moved in sync, as if they had always been a team. As soon as All Might had punched Namu back into the warp hole, Aizawa activated his quirk and disabled the warp gate, cutting off the villain's entry into the Asji. The few villains who hadn't completely walked out had their bodies cut off cleanly, blood sprouting out of their bodies like fountain. 13 in the meantime took care of the villains that had already entered by absorbing them with his quirk, effectively destroying them completely. At the same time, Eraserhead had already cuffed Kirigiri with quirk-nullifying handcuffs. The entire process took less than a couple of minutes, rendering the attack useless. "What is this?" Shigaraki said when he finally understood everything that had happened. "How are you cheating? You guys should not have been able to predict our attack at all. How were you ready to handle us before we had even stepped in?" "Do not worry about that, villain," All Might boomed, his displeasure evident in his voice as well as his expression. "For now, you will come with us and answer our questions." As if to prove their point, Eraserhead activated his quirk again to disable Shigaraki's quirk, and cuffed him as well. The moment that was done, the 3 pro heroes looked around. 13 took another moment to clear off the cut pieces of the dead villains with his quirk, before the 3 relaxed. None of us students had looked away during the entire fight, if it can be called that, except for the moment when some of us were throwing up due to the gruesome sight of villains getting cut in half due to the warp quirk deactivation. I chanced to glance at my classmates and wasn't surprised to see the horror on their faces. Being a part of the top university meant you had the necessary money to stay away shielded from the dark side of humanity. And now they were all being slapped in the face with it. Of course, the manga had not been this brutal or uncensored. But that was to be expected in a shounen manga aimed at teenagers. The reality was of course going to be different. And now that I had seen it myself, I knew what I was going to be getting into. It worried me, it unnerved me. But most importantly and most worryingly, it thrilled me. Once the excitement from the villain's interference died down, I had to take a step back and introspect. The fact that the gory fight had me thrilled of all things worried me. I didn't think I had been psychopathic or anything of the sort really in nature, given that I wasn't prone to violence, but if someone's death thrilled me, I had cause to be concerned. But how was I to figure myself out like this? Before I could spend a long time introspecting myself, Aizawa came by, calling me. Curious, I went with him, only to find myself in presence of Nezu, and All Might along with Aizawa. There were 2 possibilities given the situation. Either Nezu had already told them, or he planned to with my permission. I didn't want either, but hey, things don't always go your way. So, pacifying myself, I stood there in their presence. "What happened?" I asked, not letting my feelings slip into my voice. Nezu stared at me while the other 2 stood by his side, waiting for him to begin. At length, Nezu sighed like an actual sigh. I was surprised the rat bastard could actually sigh, and resumed his creepy staring. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but there seems to be a real shred of truth to your words. The ones you told me this morning." "What words?" Aizawa asked, somehow managing to not project his curiosity despite the raised eyebrow I could see under his messy bed hair. "Should I?" Nezu glanced back at me after a momentary glance at our homeroom teacher. I considered the situation for the moment. Would it be a good idea to tell the 2 other prominent characters in the main story the truth about myself? With Nezu verifying my identity, it would probably bring them over to my side. But that also meant I'd change my ability to predict to pretty much 0. This would be way too huge a change for me to be able to reliably predict anything major. But there was a plus side to this. And that was that we could be proactive in dealing with the festering situations. Legalities aside, legal red tape would probably be a nightmare to handle. Unless somehow we could have the Detective All Might's friend, Tsukachi, on our side. Would that help? Honestly, I wasn't sure. But I had to make a decision. I decided to be proactive. On one condition, I replied to Nezu's question. I turned towards All Might. I believe you have a friend in the police force that can detect lies. All Might looked surprised at being addressed. I do, he replied rather carefully. Do you want him here? Ideally, yes. It'd help validate whatever I say. All Might nodded and excused himself to call the person in question. In the meantime, I noted the curious and critical glance from Nezu. I thought you told me not to reveal the secret, so you could predict more accurately. That I did, I nodded, recalling our chat that morning. But I decided that being reactive like that put people's lives in danger. If we could be proactive and, of course, have the support of the police force, don't you think that would make it more effective? Nezu chuckled at my words, while Aizawa continued watching stoically. When I first noticed you, I thought you'd be more crazy about fame. I don't mean any offense. I didn't take you for an effective hero as much as a flamboyant one. I stared at him questioningly. Whatever made you think that? I don't recall ever being flashy in anything I did. You weren't, he agreed. But the way you worked leaving surprised audience behind you while smirking. That made me think you were going to be the type to not just let your work do the talking, but also talk about said work. I laughed. Believe me, I would do that. But that'd bring undue attention to myself. No thank you, especially when that man is alive. Before Aizawa could say anything about what I meant, All Might returned. He nodded while looking at me. Tsukachi said he and his sister would make time this weekend. He'll let me know when we can meet him. We are all welcome. I nodded back. Cool. Let's meet up then. I will tell everything all at once, so I don't have to repeat anything. All Might, let Tsukachi-san know we will want complete privacy. No one other than us must be there. That is an absolute must. I won't talk otherwise. If they were surprised by the forceful tone in my voice, they didn't let it show. They simply said it will be done, and that was that. I was plenty surprised that the meetup was set up this quickly. I could only wonder what Nezu had told All Might for him to be this swift with his decision-making. I had thought I'd be questioned why I knew All Might had a lie-detecting friend in the first place. But it all went extremely smoothly. Once again, I felt a bit unnerved, but pushed the feeling away. As I walked back, one last thing occurred to me. I turned back to them with a cheeky grin. Aizawa-sensei, I hope you don't trust the gate barriers as much as you did the last time I asked. That villain with his creepy hands. That one has a decay quirk. He used it during the media commotion and broke down those barriers. I burst out laughing at his expression and left before he could stop me, closing the door in the face of his scarf. The next day was a break, so that the police force could actually check the entire UA premises, which were, once again, huge. The day after that was the announcement of the sports festival. Pretty much the usual schedule. In the meantime, I spent time building rapport with Momo, Mina, Uraraka, Kirishima, Ida, Shoji, Ajiro, and of course, our dear Baku-chan. He wasn't pleased. At all. So much so that Momo approached me privately after one of his usual blow-ups. Must you always include him? She asked as she matched pace with me on our way to the UA gate. He doesn't even appreciate it, let alone actually join us. I laughed at her words. I know. I do it on purpose. It's not my problem he's got anger issues. The statement made me pause for a moment in thought. I stopped and glanced at Momo. Do you think his quirk affects him like that? Momo hummed as she mulled over my question. At length, she answered. It could. There are quirks that permanently change you like a sui-sans. Therefore, there definitely could be quirks that affect you internally. I hummed and hawed at her words before nodding. The best way to know, I said, a grin making its way on my face, is to ask the right person. When she stared at me curiously, I shook my head and pointed at our main character, who was approaching us alongside his love interest and his best male friend other than me. Oi, Izuya, I shouted, making Momo jump. Izuku jumped too. He then waved back weakly at me while I chuckled. Don't shout so suddenly like that, Momo muttered under her breath. I shrugged at her. I did warn you. Didn't I point at Izuku before shouting? That's not a warning. It's the only warning you are likely to get if the villain is stupid, I said in what everyone had come to call the teacher tone. Most good villains are like ninja. As I spoke, I wondered if she got the couple of references I made. I mean, it's not like other manga don't exist. The only one that doesn't exist in this world is the MHA manga, which is understandable. But other manga do exist. What is it? Izuku asked as he approached us. And did you have to shout like that? You were far. Not that far. At his retort, Momo looked at me pointedly, as if to say I told you so. I had to wonder for a moment why she looked at me like that, but I didn't care enough to really ponder. I just shrugged to myself and forgot about it. We had a question, I swiftly corrected myself. Do you think Bakugo's shitty personality is because of his quirk? Izuku muttered something under his breath that sounded suspiciously close to do you have to put it like that? But decided not to say it out loud. Instead, he looked away, feeling rather embarrassed. Whatever for, I wondered. I don't think it's his quirk, Izuku replied eventually. So much as it is his upbringing. His mother was loud. Is loud. Always has been. I think he got it from her since his father is actually really nice and mellow. Ah, I see. It was obvious that Izuku was uncomfortable talking about it. For once, I decided to let him be. Talking about Bakugo in anything but positive tone was pretty much impossible for him. I was yet to break him out of that habit. It would be better if he broke out of it sooner, rather than later when Bakugo also learned about All Might's secret. But that wasn't my priority for the time being. I changed the topic. So, what are your plans for the festival? I asked the group. I haven't yet thought about it, but I plan to when I get home, Momo replied, much to my surprise. My surprise must have been evident, for she gave me a look. What? I shook my head at her. And here I thought, you had already planned something. I mean, I know what I want to do, but I can't exactly plan anything without knowing what sort of opponent I would be against, she said sensibly. My quirk uses my fat, so I have to be very efficient with the way I use it. I can't use it infinitely the way you or Midoriya-san or Asui-san can. Still, seeing as you have never really lost any noticeable amount of weight when using your quirk, you must be pretty efficient with it to begin with, I observed aloud. I doubt a cannon's worth of energy can be stored in a human body. You could be genuinely creative and could produce quite literally anything. I sent her a meaningful look. Yours is a dangerous quirk, and I don't mean economically. Uraraka shuddered at my ominous words, while Momo looked embarrassed. Izuku bumped me lightly on my arm. You don't need to sound so ominous. I'm not trying to, I protested half-heartedly. It's just an observation. Sure is an ominous one, Izuku replied with a chuckle. Hey. My exclamation only served to make others laugh. I gave up and joined them. As we made our way out, I noticed the look students from other classes were giving us. Nowhere near as curious or hostile as it was in the original manga. Perhaps because the villain attack was successfully foiled by the heroes this time around. So, we were probably just a class of victims. And to think 1A is considered the best. I heard the murmur and glanced in the direction. And who else would greet me other than Shinso? Damn. I had forgotten just how snobby he was in the beginning, until Aizawa took him under the wing. I could only chuckle ominously. Time to stoke the fire. Hey, you there, I called him out, bringing everyone's attention to us. What is it? Shinso asked quite boldly. Almost as if he was daring me to do something stupid, I guess. I didn't care. I simply cocked my head towards my friends. Be wary when you judge a book by its cover. You never know what hides underneath. I knew my message was cryptic at best, which was why I said it the way I did. Because I knew that even when I had interfered with 1A's development the way I did, I knew they had the balls to stick through it all the ups and downs of being a hero. For now, though, they had no idea about the downs of being a hero. Sunday came along way too fast. Aizawa-sensei had pulled me aside on Friday after school to tell me when and where to go. Which was Sunday morning, and the interrogation room of the UA police station. Oh yeah, UA had its own sponsored police station. That was a new discovery for me. The school was rich. Richy rich. And so there I was, standing in front of the cold, unwelcoming steel door of the interrogation room. Sheesh, they could have at least made this room a bit welcoming. I simply knocked and opened the door a bit to check who was in. Nezu, All Might, and Tsukachi were sitting inside. Nezu gestured for me to enter and sit in a chair in front of them. As I did, I noticed how interrogaty the entire atmosphere was. Sheesh, did they think I was a spy or something? I sat down with a quick, wordless greeting, and we all waited in heavy, suffocating silence. Not long after, Aizawa-sensei and Tsukachi Makoto entered and sat on both of my sides. There were no verbal greetings. Everyone sat tense, bracing themselves for something. Nezu, always playing the unruffled character, stood up and addressed everyone. Welcome everyone to this secret meeting. Before we start, he glanced at the detective. I hope all the necessary precautions have been taken. Everything is ready. We are the only people here right now. Perfect. Well then, let me introduce you to one of my new students in UA, Korai Haru. I smiled at everyone present. All of them returned a nod back. No smiles, though. I was disappointed. I was also nervous, so I couldn't really focus on such a minor thing either. "You're nervous," Makoto observed without so much as a glance in my direction. Surprised, I turned towards her, only to see one of her fingers very lightly touching my arm. She must have been really discreet and nervous, if I didn't notice that at all. I simply chuckled awkwardly. Hard to not be with someone like you sitting beside me. I cursed myself inwardly at the awkward attempt to flirt. Damn me, damn my personality, and definitely damn my inexperience. Makoto was downright beautiful, and I had been having a hard enough time not focusing on her ever since she had entered. My response was greeted with Naomasa's raised eyebrow and a small chuckle from Makoto. "I must wonder what about me made you nervous." "Your quirk." "Secondly," I replied, intensely relieved that she took it as a joke. She could be just playing with me right now to get information out, and I wouldn't know. I had never been close to a police officer enough to know the ins and outs of the business. "Secondly, your beauty takes the first rank in making me nervous." Makoto simply burst out laughing. Naomasa and All Might were having a hard time hiding their laughter. "Hey!" I exclaimed, annoyed. "Give me a break. I've never done this before." "Don't worry, kiddo," Makoto replied, an amused smile still playing on her face. "No one has ever flirted with me in an interrogation room. Well, before you anyway. I'm not a kid." "All right, enough playing." Nezu clapped his stubby little arms and silenced the crowd. "We are here for a serious discussion. You two can flirt later." I huffed and sat back, all the nervousness out of my system. I guess being embarrassed has its upsides. Nezu must hold a decent amount of authority since everyone immediately quieted down and focused at him. As I was saying, the principal continued. "This is Korai Haru. On the day of the attack, he approached me in the morning before class, asking to talk to me privately about something that he thought only I should know." He paused dramatically. "He asked me if I read manga." I rolled my eyes at his dramatic speech. He was definitely trying to get a reaction out of these professionals. If he managed to, I'd be surprised. Quite in line with my expectations, the only thing he received were a few raised eyebrows. "And?" All Might prompted. "What he basically said can be summarized in a sentence," the mouse continued. "For him, this world is a manga from his world." "Is this the reason you had us make time for this discussion?" Makoto scoffed as she leaned back and crossed her arms. "And there seems to be a shred of truth to his words to me back then." Nezu continued as if she hadn't spoken at all. "He was the one who warned me up front about the villain's attack a few days ago. I had stressed to All Might to conserve his energy on that day, no matter how much he heard calls for help." "Is that right, All Might?" "Right. And you think that's enough to believe him?" Makoto noted sarcastically. "Makoto, you have a point, but the fact remains that he did know. He could be a spy for all we know," Naomasa said thoughtfully, his detectiveness shining through. "Did you forget I'm sitting right here?" I intoned as I listened to them speak. "There's not much you can do with 5 of us here," Aizawa intoned in just as flat a voice as I had. I gave him a flat look. "And you already forgot what I can do with my quirk. I don't have quirk nullifying cuffs on me, you know? I could erase your quirk before you could activate it. And you wouldn't know that if I already had my quirk activated, would you?" He had no comeback on that one. He just grunted and sat back, letting his scarf flutter threateningly. I simply smirked before turning back to the discussion at hand, only to see them all sitting somewhat tensely. I stared at them questioningly. "What happened?" "Korai Shounen," All Might said tentatively. "You do realize that what you said could be misconstrued as threatening, don't you?" "Ah. I had completely forgotten about that." "Anyway," Nezu said, effectively cutting off any possible discussion on that topic. "There is a good reason why we are having this meeting. It is to validate Haru's claims. We are going to be discussing what he knows in depth. Makoto, here, will be ensuring he's not lying. Naomasa too. Aizawa is here to ensure he doesn't use his quirk needlessly." Oh, so there was some thought behind the choice of people present. I had thought it was just a random coincidence that some of the major characters were present. "Sheesh. Could you stop treating me like a criminal?" I protested in annoyance. "If I wanted to be one, I'd have used my knowledge to destroy you already. Why do you think I approached you first, Nezu?" "I know, but precautions and policies exist," the mouse replied, a glint in his eyes that sent shivers down my spine. It surprised me how scary the mouse could look despite his stubbiness. This time, everyone meant business. Makoto grabbed my wrist, and everyone else squared up as Nezu finally turned towards me fully. "Well then, Haru-kun, let's have a nice, long chat." I could only shiver in nervousness as everyone looked me in the eye, and Nezu sat down. This was going to be a really long discussion. You know, Naomasa said as he sat back in his chair, having paced around for quite some time. Despite how utterly ridiculous it sounds, most, if not all, of the things Haru has said fit in perfectly given our current situation. I can't believe there'd be a time in my life I'd doubt my quirk, Makoto grumbled as she stared at the notes her brother had made on a whiteboard they had borrowed for the time. Really? This Midoriya Izuku is All Might's successor. All for One is alive. Not just that, but that he will attack heroes in the Kamino Ward and put Best Jeanist out of commission. All Might's real form will be revealed. Quirk erasing bullets with Yakuza. And there's a traitor amongst the students? What was the name? Aoyama, I supplied helpfully. I can't believe it, All Might muttered, seemingly exhausted after the discussion we had had. So many things happening right under my nose, and I am unaware. I'm such a failure of a hero. Symbol of peace, huh? I'd have been unable to believe if not for the fact that everything makes sense in the grand scheme of things, Naomasa said, getting up and resuming his pacing again. Don't forget about my quirk's drawback, Makoto reminded. If he certainly believes his words, I won't be able to detect it. That doesn't explain how almost all things fit in the grand scheme of things, her brother replied. If they had been delusions, there should have been some easy-to-pick issues in the story, but there are none. At least, none about the things he knows. I'm not delusional, I said dryly. Why do you think I asked for both of you before deciding to reveal all this? I see the point, but I see why you wanted it to be just us, and no one else who knows all this, Nezu said at length. For once, he actually looked bothered. Cooperation from the police will be necessary. And all this information is dangerous if it gets out at all. He looked us all in the eye seriously. I know I have no authority, but it must be ensured that absolutely no one must know about this. At all. If All for One gets even a whiff of what we know, we will be doomed. I'm pretty sure what I have told you will change over time, I pointed out. Don't forget that your actions in my world were different from what you will do from now on. Don't come to me later complaining that I didn't tell you something in case things go wrong. I've told you all everything I know, and it's bound to change. Just be ready to deal with the quirks of the villains I have mentioned. Especially Chisaki and Tamura. At the mention of Tamura, All Might deflated even further. To think I failed my master like this. I could only shrug at his words. What else could have I done? I got up from my seat, glad to be moving after sitting for almost 4 hours. Just keep me in the loop if and when you change things, I reminded them. More than anything, if you mitigate all the upcoming fights, don't forget that it will slow the new students' progress drastically, and they won't be able to or have the drive to improve themselves quickly. There has to be some balance between both. Easier said than done, Nezu said. It's one thing when we did not know. It's another when we know and still let it happen. I simply smiled at him. Once we are out of this room, no one knows anything. The 2 weeks to the US Sports Festival passed by in a blink, during which we played around and learned around like usual. It didn't help that the media was particularly persistent after the declaration from UA that the festival will happen, and no mere security breach was going to stop them. It was a security breach and not a villain attack, thanks to my interference. I wasn't sure if I should be happy. I never got to see the All Might vs. Namu fight in all its glory, and feel the shockwaves and steam and feelings and everything else of the fight. If I were to get another chance, though, I'd still do the same thing. Because, despite seeing them as characters at one point, I had grown to love them as people. They were my new reality, and I didn't want anything to happen to them. Unfortunately, there was only so much I could shield them from. If I kept doing that, they wouldn't improve. And so, much to my weird combination of chagrin and relief, Nezu let me know that they weren't planning on interfering unless it was dire. And they'd have heroes in place to act without delay. That was the best they could do given that they also wanted to preserve my ability to predict. Midoriya, Kori. Breaking out of my thoughts, I looked up to see Todoroki walking up to us. I simply raised an eyebrow at him, while Izuku verbalized the question. Todoroki, what is it? Todoroki went on to declare that he will beat us despite All Might's eye being on us. I was surprised to find out that he thought All Might had an eye on me. But thinking back over the previous 2 weeks, I couldn't blame him for thinking like that. All Might and Aizawa as well had often called me aside to talk or clarify about the things we had discussed on that fateful day of interrogation. Unluckily for me, I never really saw Makoto after that day. It would have been fun getting to know her. But she was a busy person despite being just a few years older than me in this world. I couldn't exactly force her to spend time with me for no real reason. We weren't that close as friends yet. Hell, I wouldn't even call us friends for the time being. But I digressed. I brought my attention back to the confrontation at hand, listening to Izuku declaring his goal of gunning for the top. Right, Todoroki said, looking down at him. He then turned towards me. Anything to say? I snorted at the condescension in his voice. Was he this bad in the beginning of the story? I barely remembered. But I answered his question nonetheless. All I have to say is one thing, I said, a mischievous grin forming on my face. Todoroki showed no expression on his face. And that is? I grinned. Make sure your daddy issues don't affect your hero work. Or you will have civilians' blood on your hands. Before he could even process his shock, there was a quick announcement that we were to make our way to the stadium. Thanking my stars, all of us did exactly that. I resolutely ignored the whispers and mutters behind me. We stepped into the stadium, the moment President Mike announced us. Kirishima felt quite nervous, while Bakugo was excited. Izuku, I was pretty sure, was a walking dead, a zombie because of his nerves. For the athlete's oath, midnight started, attracting all our attention. Your student representative is from Class 1A, Korai Haru. Damn it, really? I wanted to avoid that. But then again, I performed a bit too good during the entrance exam to not be the representative. Sighing to myself, I walked up onto the stage, still resolutely ignoring the mutters, and stood facing the audience. For the athlete's oath, I started, copying Bakugo's start from the manga, and cringing at the flatness of my voice as I said it. We promise to abide by all rules and regulations of this event. To the T. Good luck, everyone. It was thankfully well received, if a bit short, judging from the whispers. But whatever. I had not wanted the attention on myself to begin with. Thank you, Haru, Midnight said, without missing a beat, ignoring my flat delivery of the oath. Now, without any delay, let's get the first event started. The qualifiers this year for the first years is obstacle course race. I could only barely hold back my sigh. A sigh of relief. So, it was the same after all. It saved me a hell lot of trouble. Or at least that was what I had been thinking until Midnight said, don't do anything off course. Then, I sighed a sigh of disappointment. I was hoping to skip out on the race based on the technicality of the rules. So much for that plan. We all stood at the gate, waiting for the countdown to start. Unfortunately for most of our class, many stood somewhere in the middle of the pack or the back. Only Bakugo, Todoroki, Midoriya, and Momo were near the front. And out of them, only Todoroki was up at the front. I sighed again, this time in exasperation. He was going to be annoying to deal with. The buzzer buzzed, and everyone ran. Except me. I used my controlled air bursts to straight up fly in the air. I couldn't yet create solid air. That required too much concentration to create. But air bombs were my thing. Using those bursts, I scaled the entirety of the stadium wall from above, while others were getting crushed at the narrow starting gate. Because, fortunately for me, they never stated an upper limit to the course. So as far as I was concerned, all the space above the course all the way till space was fair game. As I scaled the stadium, I easily saw Todoroki icing the course and moving on ahead. Behind him was most of 1A. Ahead of him, after a turn, were the giant robots. Being in the air with an air control quirk is a pure blessing and an unadulterated advantage. As always, I removed all air resistance in my path and bombed my way straight ahead, high above everyone else and pretty much out of range of everyone that didn't have long-ranged quirks. Shamelessly enough, I simply flew above the robots, avoiding them completely. Why would I bother? Given the range of these robots and the way they were programmed, I could intelligently guess that they'd ignore the sole target above them for a bunch below. And that's exactly what happened. I continued on like that, and simply avoided all the obstacles completely. Talk about underwhelming. The only thing threatening my lead would be my speed since I didn't want to hurt myself. If I didn't care about that, I was fairly sure my dead body would have had minutes worth of lead over everyone else, including Todoroki. As it was, I ended up second behind Izuku. Mofo passed me just seconds before I crossed the finish line myself. He sure got lucky there. But well, I wasn't particularly annoyed about it. I mean, I avoided getting 10 million points on myself. Of course, I was assuming it'd be the same test for the next round. You know, analyze the past data and all. Ha, I was right after all. Cavalry battle was next with Izuku having 10 million points. It happened like it had just like usual. Izuku was avoided. He found Uraraka and Hatsune, and Tokoyami. And teams were slowly forming like they had. The only difference this time around was that because the villain's attack had been unsuccessful and had been dealt with swiftly, there was no real antagonization of other classes towards 1A. And that meant no Monoma bullshit. I was saddened by that development. But I was going to make sure that his insanity got revealed somehow. MHA without Monoma bullshit? Please, that can't exist. Presently though, team formation was necessary. I sought out Momo for her versatile quirk first. Thankfully, I was fast enough that Todoroki couldn't get her. Next, I sought out Kendo Itsuka. Monoma came along with her as a free package. That formed our team of 4. I was curious as to how that'd affect Todoroki's teaming strategy. Surprisingly enough, it wasn't hard to convince the pair from 1B. Because of the non-existence of any enmity, both of them were fairly agreeable, if a bit wary when I invited them. I could see the question mark on Momo's face. Once we were gathered, the 3 looked at me for an explanation. I held my hands up. Don't look at me like that. I chose you 3 based on what I found out about your quirks. All 3 looked surprised. Itsuka, the beauty, looked even warier now. You know about our quirks. I shrugged. Yua prides itself on its transparency. Can you fault me? Wah. Their confused looks made me sigh. Really, couldn't they have explored their school's website a bit more? Yua proudly proclaimed its new students as up-and-coming heroes there. I wanted to explain more, but given the limited time, I decided to talk with them about it later. For the moment, I shook my head and refocused my attention on the cavalry battle. So, now, let me explain my strategy to you, I said, getting their attention onto the task at hand. I nodded at Momo. Yours is the most versatile quirk. I want you to keep an eye around us and see what item you can make on the go to make it difficult for enemies. Same with Monoma with his copy quirk. How do you know what my exact quirk is? I stared at him in annoyance. I will tell you later. Just make sure to copy Momo's quirk in intervals. I am fairly sure your quirk must have a time limit. Otherwise, it would be way too overpowered. Wah. I ignored him in favor of addressing Itsuka. You will be the front horse for us. With your quirk, it will be quite easy to handle most, if not all, physical quirks like Kirishima's or Tetsu's. Your focus will be on leading us towards everyone but Izuku. Favoring Midoriya-san? Momo asked, amused. Nah, I replied with a laugh. It will be more difficult to attack him since everyone will be targeting him for those 1,000,000 points. That is true. Sure, that works for us, Itsuka said, narrowing her eyes a bit. But what are you going to do? What's your quirk? I simply laughed aloud at my thoughts to her answer. All 3 looked weirded out, understandably. But we had to work with what we got. I smirked at the 3 of them. All right, I will tell you my quirk so you know what to expect. Momo, having been interested in my quirk for quite some time, leaned in, as did the others so none of us missed anything. My quirk is air control, I explained to the 3 of them. I call it aircon to confuse everyone. Because the first thing to come in your mind when you hear that is air conditioning, not control. Do you know what this means? It took barely a moment for Momo to understand the gravity of my power. Not long after, the other 2 also understood. Don't tell me you are planning to suffocate everyone to death, Itsuka said, baffled. I stared back at her, scandalized. What hero acts like a villain to the villains? She sighed in relief. There was a mischievous twinkle in her eye. I just confirmed. I stared at her for a moment before bursting out laughing. Now I suddenly feel bad I quit being the president. It'd have been fun hanging out with you. Both of 1B gaped at me. You were asked to be 1 and you quit. I was voted, I corrected them. I didn't want the responsibility and the workload, so I quit. I quite like the idea of having time for myself. Itsuka made a face at my words. I can understand. It's hard to find time to myself. I finger-gunned at her, making Momo chuckle. On the other hand, Monoma seemed to be thinking deeply about our strategy. At length, he looked up and said, It would be better if I copied your quirk rather than hers. I raised an eyebrow at him, curious. Do you have something in mind? I was thinking your quirk is even more versatile overall, he replied slowly, as if strategizing something in his mind. And if I understand your words correctly, we should be able to form solid air walls, since we can control air molecules themselves. I grimaced at his words. Believe me, I've tried. I failed spectacularly. The sheer amount of pressure you need to create air walls is not something humanly possible. Still, I held out my hand. If you think you can do it within the short time you'll have my quirk for, have a go at it. My honesty must have resonated with them, for they seemed to lose their wariness. Monoma grasped my hand, his quirk active. It never hurts to try. And so, during the last few minutes of the 15-minute team forming period we had, Monoma tried out stuff with my quirk. Eventually and ruefully, he came to the conclusion that I was right, and using my quirk the way I did was plain ridiculous. In the meantime, I looked around to see what Todoroki had done given that Momo was with us. Unsurprisingly, his was a team of 3 without Momo. He hadn't replaced her with anyone else. I could easily imagine that he thought no others would fit into his team. I could also imagine he never checked for 1B's quirks. Well, sucks for him. No way was I giving up the chance to win this round and make friends with yet another beauty. Really sucks for him. The bell rang, and the madness started. Just like I predicted, everyone gunned for Izuku. My horses understood the significance of why I wanted to avoid Izuku when they saw the mass of bodies ganging up on him. I grinned as I held my hand out towards Monoma. You know what to do. Monoma responded by copying my quirk. Moments later, a huge gust of wind came from the bottom of the stadium and completely ripped apart all the headbands, sending them flying into the air. Everyone gaped in disbelief as the headbands got shuffled in the breeze and went all over the place. I heard a lot of curses around us as we ran like madmen in the direction Monoma had thrown the headbands in. As we ran, I chuckled lightly. I'm glad we have this uniform, girls, I said to the two girls carrying me. This would have been a terrible strategy if skirts were also a part of the girls' uniform. Considering how hard they were running with me as their rider, the only response I got was an ultra-hard squeeze to my thighs. Itsuka continued being the amazing lead horse. She was by literally slapping away teams with her quirk and throwing them out of our way. Same with Momo and Monoma, who had copied Momo's quirk already. No one could touch us for the most part. Some quirks were dangerous like Mina's, but we chose to avoid them instead of defend against them. That said, if necessary, I had 2 Momos in my team. Initially, we had thought it would be easier to collect all the headbands and then focus on running. But now that we were actually trying to execute the idea, I came to the conclusion that it would be more difficult. So, I took a call. All right, guys, change of plans, I muttered as I saw half the bands being snatched again. We will keep the headbands out of everyone's reach with my quirk. We will strike at the end. As I said that, I acted, throwing another gust of wind at everyone, this time from the side. While many held on to the newly acquired headbands, many couldn't, and once again, a bunch of them were floating free in the wind. Only for a second. I followed through with another breeze, and literally sent the headbands high up in the air, hundreds of meters above the stadium. Another gust, another 100 meters. Then I paused and glanced around to make a judgment for my next move. Most disappointingly, almost everyone refocused on the meager number of bands available near the ground that some teams had held onto. Some, like Bakugo, were glaring at me as if I had just ruined their favorite food by peeing in it in front of them. Still others were confused about what was happening. I had no idea why Bakugo decided to glare at me. I mean, yes, this gust was my work, but the first one was Monoma. I was most definitely not the reason for the first gust. Monoma must have copied my quirk somehow. I chuckled at my thoughts for a moment before addressing my team. All right, guys, here's the deal. For now, I will be able to keep those bands out of everyone's reach. And since we have no band, no one will come to us. Let's take some time to rest and recuperate while we wait for the time to run out. I paused for a moment. Bakugo is the only exception, I added rather begrudgingly. He can blast his way up to those bands, and I'm not sure I will be able to keep the 10 million band out of his hands. As if he had just heard me, Bakugo launched himself in the direction of the floating headbands, intent on getting his hands on a few. I could only groan in annoyance. You totally jinxed it, Itsuka said with a suppressed chuckle. I only wanted to warn you all. Well then, how are we dealing with Bakugo? A beat passed. Then I laughed. I guess it's time to send him on a wild goose chase. And that's exactly what I did. As soon as I thought Bakugo was dangerously close, a gust of wind moved all the bands out of his reach. Said gust was strong enough that the bands had moved out of harm's way in record time, and weak enough that it didn't bring Bakugo along. That said, I was fairly sure it would take only so long before Bakugo would come up with some way to deal with that stupidity. I wasn't sure how long I was going to hold out against that animalistic strategy side of his brain. Well, only time would tell. Time did indeed tell. When it was close to only 1 minute remaining, I sent all the bands downwards in a frenzy towards the teams, making sure that caught their attentions. As soon as they did, I continued moving the bands along until the last few seconds when I collected them and wore them onto my neck just as the buzzer sounded. That was too close, I sighed. I wasn't sure I'd get the timing right. That was incredible. Haru. Itsuka breathed in disbelief as she watched our team's rank shoot up like nobody's business. I'm really surprised that you did manage to save those bands from burning away at Bakugo's hands. Believe me, even I am surprised, I replied with a chuckle as I jumped down from my horses. It wasn't easy controlling those bands. I couldn't just shoot them anywhere given how flexible Bakugo is with his quirk. As I realized later that day, my presence shook up the ranking like anything. We were first, followed by Team Todoroki, Team Bakugo, and Team Izuku. That wasn't all that surprising. No, the most surprising part was apart from my team, rest were all just 1A. I glanced upwards where the teacher sat, wondering if Nezu had a hand here as well. I decided to ask him later. For the time being, I wanted to know how Izuku felt. Just as I was about to approach Izuku, Todoroki approached me. I blanked out for a moment, wondering why. Wasn't he supposed to ask if Izuku was All Might's kid or something? A comedic moment waiting to happen. Why was he approaching me then? Korai, could you come with me for a moment? I barely gave the question a thought and nodded. This development was also curious, after all. I had to wonder what Todoroki wanted with me. I followed him. He took me to that same spot where he had asked Izuku that question. We both stood there tensely until Todoroki finally asked the question that I did not expect. How do you know? I could not, for the life of me, fathom what he meant by that. How do I know what? I asked. You told me not to bring daddy issues in. I can only guess that you know what I am. Ah. Oh. I sighed, unable to believe what I had brought on to myself. After a few moments of consideration, I decided to take this bull by its horns. Looking up, I tried to look as nonchalant as possible. Yeah, Quirk marriage, right? So, you do know. The anger in his voice was palpable. How did you figure it out? I shrugged, not intent on answering the question. I have my sources, I said, hoping he wouldn't ask. For a moment, he did look like he wanted to fight my statement and ask, but after a moment, he simply looked away for a moment. Fine, but if you know, you probably also know that Endeavor created me simply for his greed for power. And that's why I will never use his power. I gave him a tired look. And I should care? Why? Because I will crush you. Don't worry. I will give up if I face you. You will be able to win just fine. If he seemed even remotely amused by my statement, he didn't show it. He simply left with a nod, as if to say that was that. I stared after his retreating figure, thoughts rolling around in my head, wondering if I should really act in his favor at any time, or leave it to Izuku. A few moments of hard thinking told me there was no point getting involved in his issues. I was not the main character, so I didn't have those tendencies to begin with. I did not intend to develop them either. Leave it to Izuku. That's what I decided. A lunch break, and a Minta prank later. We stood by midnight, waiting to draw lots. I would never tell Minta, but this was one prank I appreciated. Momos were awesome, even though I never got a peek really. Clothed bounciness should also be a trait in real life. It was awesome. Lots were drawn and matches were decided. I didn't remember the matchups in the original timeline for the most part, so I wasn't sure what to make of them. What I did know was that I had been matched up against Shinso instead of Midoriya. Damn it. I glanced behind me just in time to make eye contact with Shinso. A nod of acknowledgement was exchanged, and that was that. As I turned back, I felt glad to have interfered and not let the League of Villains Usti attack happen. The lack of animosity was beautiful. It made the actual festival sporty and fun, rather than mean and irritating like it felt to me in canon. Sure, story-wise, it raised the stakes, but damn. Actually being in the situation made it way more obvious just how good a choice it was not having the unreasonable animosity. I happily made my way to the stadium entrance, a skip in my step as I headed off to face my first fight. The first match, Present Mike's voice resounded in the stadium. On one side, we have Korai Haru, having performed brilliantly so far. And here we have Shinso Hitoshi, who has done nothing to stand out yet so far. The crowd cheered despite the stupid info he gave out. Really, Mike? I thought to myself, mildly amused. Could you not have found a less embarrassing way to introduce the poor guy? Said poor guy looked stoic, but I knew he wasn't oblivious, and that he was definitely annoyed at some level at the way he was introduced. Present Mike swiftly presented the rules over his mic hat, and the match started. I give up, huh? Shinso started with his usual, offensive words. Get it, Korai Haru? This match is going to test your strength of will. I tuned out his rambling, carelessly looking around and observing the crowd. I just kept him in my peripheral vision, knowing what to expect of his quirk. For the moment, I wanted to see which heroes were currently watching us live in the stadium. I could see some familiar faces such as Miss Joke, Endeavor, Hawks, and even Best Jeanist. All of them had fairly neutral expressions on their faces, Miss Joke being the exception, but that was to be expected given her name and quirk. Are you even listening? I turned towards Shinso, annoyed, and almost reflexively opened my mouth. Luckily, my brain caught up with my actions and stopped me before I could utter even a sound. Instead, my face took on an even more irritated expression as a substitute for the words currently in my mind. Shinso was starting to look a bit desperate, his stoic facade slowly coming down as he faced a mute opponent in me. Present Mike was trying his very best to keep the hype up despite the ridiculous slowdown as I refused to verbally engage with Shinso. I was heavily considering continuing to mess around, but decided I had played enough. After all, there were more things to do after this match. Like having a chat with Endeavor. I had some plans, is all. And so, wordlessly, I started walking towards Shinso, who was still trying to get me angry by using offensive language, trying to hit at my pride, my ego, or whatever. Unfortunately for him, I was well aware of his quirk and could handle him just fine. Given the fact that he did not look like he worked out, and I did work out, it was pretty easy for me to just land a punch on him and force him to take steps back. This continued for just a while till Shinso decided to run, lest he walk out of the circle. As if I would let him. I pulled him by his arm and straight up threw him the remaining distance and outside the boundary, easily winning the match. As Present Mike announced the winner, I noticed Shinso biting his lip, frustration clear on his face. Damn it. For a moment, I wanted to do the same as before and leave Shinso to Izuku, but then decided that Shinso, and in turn, the world would benefit if he changed his mindset sooner. So, I squatted and held out an arm towards him. What's got you frustrated? I asked, letting curiosity slip into my voice. It's nothing, Shinso replied, not attempting to even reach out to my arm. I gave him a flat look. Yeah, right, and I'm stupid. As if someone blessed with a good quirk like you'd understand. Did I use my quirk? Huh? Did I use my quirk? I repeated forcefully, looking him in the eye. Look me in the eye and declare that I used my quirk to win against you. There was a tense moment until Shinso looked away. You didn't, he conceded. But that doesn't mean anything when you have such a good quirk. I forced his head my way, making eye contact with him and cutting his rant off. Let me let you in on a secret, Shinso, I said, a small grin on my face. Izuku didn't even get his quirk until a few months ago. Can you imagine the hell his life must have been? He didn't answer. You had a quirk that you could use to force bullies away from you. But Izuku couldn't do anything. Not even now when he has awoken a quirk. Habits like that are hard to break when they are formed from childhood. What's your point? He spat as venomously as he could, which was nothing. In fact, he seemed to have given up hope to join the hero course. I simply smiled, letting his face go. All I'm saying that the way you look at it is all wrong. No one said you had to be hero course. In fact, I'd say your quirk is perfect when it comes to interrogation. You'd be amazing in the police interrogation department. Your quirk is awesome in the sense that you don't need to fight anyone. Villains are pretty loud and verbal to being with, generally speaking, so just one little push of a button from you would mean bang. The villain will follow your every word. Don't you think that's straight up awesome? Even All Might has to fight and shed blood. You'd win battles for the good side without so much as a scratch to either side. That makes your quirk game-changing. I paused, letting my speech peter out. Shinso looked like he had had an epiphany during my speech. Anyway, I said, holding out my arm again. I'm sure you'll find good uses of your quirks. Yuo will give you immense support once you figure out how to use your quirk effectively. Stating negative things to rile up your opponents is good, but it's not effective, and it ruins your chances if the opponent chooses to be mute. You need to have backup plans in place for such things. Like they say, a hero is always prepared. After helping Shinso up, I left the stadium without looking back. There were some things I needed to do after all. Time to seek out Endeavor. I found Endeavor and Todoroki talking in the corridor. Or well, at the end of their talk as Endeavor declared that Todoroki will reach his limit soon. I could only roll my eyes at his words. Then again, someone as blinded by power and greed as him would not be able to see things my way easily. It was going to be a ton of work, and I was fairly sure I wouldn't be successful. But hey, Todoroki did nothing to deserve such harsh words from his father. As someone who accidentally happened upon them and overheard their talk, it was my right to make a decent move in Todoroki's favor. I bumped into Todoroki as he just walked out of the corridor. The rage on his face almost made me whistle in astonishment. Living with that much hatred must be mind-numbing. And Sasuke-ish. Definitely not the best way to live or think given how poisonous it can turn one into. Or obsessive. I made a deliberate action of looking towards Endeavor, who was observing us critically. Mischief made its way in my actions, and I grinned at the ablaze hero. Yo. Endeavor grunted in irritation as he straightened up from his leaning posture against the wall. I hope you do better than that, Shoto. You might just have to use your fire. Oi. I called in annoyance before Todoroki could get a word in edgewise. I did nothing for you to call me a runt. Endeavor simply HM-fed and turned around, not even bothering to reply. I glared at his retreating figure, considering how to make him stop. Then, my brain came up with a brilliant idea that could very well dig my grave. Things like that are the reason you're not as well received as All Might. I must have made his blood boil, or in his case, vaporize given the size of his flames now. He turned around, absolutely flipping mad. Honestly, his expression would give Bakugo's Furious One a run for its money. It was like an angry Pomeranian raised to the power of another angry Pomeranian. That was the best way to describe it. I waited for his reaction with bated breath. Surprisingly enough, he didn't explode like I had been expecting him to. He simply grunted again, more angrily, and turned around. As if a runt like you would understand the reality pro-hero's face. I'm fairly sure I understand it better than you, I snarked back, emboldened by his lack of a violent reaction. At least, I don't deny reality. I never got a response back, verbal or non-verbal. The second-ranked hero left my sights, leaving me and Todoroki alone. I glanced at him. You weren't kidding. Your father is quite the arse. Todoroki's expression mellowed slightly, but that was all I got from him. His name was already being called out in the stadium, so we had to separate. He simply nodded at me and went outside. As I walked back towards the stands, I mused about the interaction. I was quite disappointed I couldn't get a rise from Endeavor, but I had expected that somewhat. A hero wouldn't be second-ranked if he couldn't maintain his image. You know what I mean? Yeah. By the time I made to the stands, Todoroki was just done melting his ice. I watched the remaining matches happen without much enthusiasm. I could practically predict accurately just who would win this tournament. Spoilers. It ain't me. Some of the matchups had changed spectacularly with my presence in the universe. So, there was no way for me to predict exactly who would win. But I could tell it wasn't me. Simply because I had no real counter to Bakugo. And I had no intention of getting burnt, should he be my opponent at any point. Sadly, my costume wasn't done yet. I had given Power Loader my full body scan a while ago, before my talk with the police. I knew it would take time, and because of my lateness in applying for one, I couldn't have it ready by the time for the festival. As such, I was not in a position to really take on quirks like Bakugo's or Mainta's. And so, I watched as Todoroki, Tokoyami, Itsuka, Bakugo, Izuku, Mei, and Monoma of all people won. For someone with a copy quirk with a 10-minute time limit, Monoma was spectacular in learning and applying the quirks he copied. That was a real talent of his. I hoped that he was a better person overall and interacting with him would not bring out his insanity and inferiority complex from canon. My next match ended up with Tokoyami as my opponent. I was pretty disappointed. I wanted Itsuka as my opponent. It'd have been fun battling her. My wish to get close to her had nothing to do with my feelings at all. You are mistaken if you think so. And keep your mind out of the gutter. She does people these days. Thus, I stood there against the bird head, wondering how I'd deal with him. Sure, Dark Shadow wasn't as powerful in the bright light as it was in the dark. But that meant nothing when it could just very well push me outside the ring with its speed. I didn't want to use anything lethal against Tokoyami, even if healing quirks were a thing. It was not a pleasant experience having air ripped out of your lungs. I had tried it once on myself, and done it much more slowly than I'd normally go against a villain, and let me tell you, it was not fun feeling my lung getting crushed from outside in. I had to stay in the hospital for literal months, with the doctors making sure I was not using my quirk, and that my lungs were healing correctly. That was the first and last time I used my quirk lethally. Sure, I continued practicing so I wouldn't lose my edge, but it was against non-living things. I had since kept my lethal moveset locked up inside my brain, and only chose to use suffocation as a method to win, because it left no mark and no lasting damage as long as I was aware of how long I was suffocating my target. That, unfortunately, wouldn't work against Dark Shadow, which was basically a personified quirk. It didn't breathe, so it couldn't be suffocated. So, I had to be more violent in some way, and make sure it didn't affect Tokoyami. As far as I was aware, damage sustained by Dark Shadow did not transfer to Tokoyami when it was returned, so I had that much leeway. But still, no concrete plan. I guess I was just going to have to wing it. Get it? Wing it. I chuckled to myself as I waited for midnight to announce the start of the match. I was going to have to think of a plan on the fly. All right, I will stop with the puns. But you will hear me grumble about humorless readers. Midnight signaled the start and Tokoyami responded by launching Dark Shadow at me. No time to respond, eh? I thought as I reflexively jumped to the side. It was in vain. Dark Shadow was a sentient quirk. It was going to be a homing attack, so simple dodging was useless. I could only scream in disbelief as I was caught unawares and Dark Shadow straight up picked me up and threw me away basically outside the ring. I did the only thing I always had done so far in UA. Created a huge compressed air bomb at where I presumed my landing was and let it explode. The resulting shockwaves slapped me right back just inside the ring. I immediately got up and ran, and not a moment too soon as Dark Shadow whizzed by where I had been sitting. Holy shit! Was the only thought in my mind at that moment. I severely underestimated Tokoyami's quirk. It's insanely flexible and responsive. Ha! Not bad, I heard Tokoyami say. Not many can escape my dark abyss. No kidding, I exclaimed back, quite grateful. His words helped me focus back on to the main issue with this fight. I had to find a way to push Takoyami himself out, or force a way to weaken or strengthen his quirk. Strengthen and force it out of his control. As I dodged Dark Shadow continually and forced my brain to run a mile a minute, I recalled a few physics lectures from my middle school about total internal reflection. If I were to make air higher up in the stadium unnaturally dense, I could potentially reduce the incoming light. But I scrapped the idea instantly, because it was approaching noon, and total internal reflection only happened when light hit at an angle. Alright, modifying air to change the intensity of light idea was out. Well, I could always go with my working air bombs. But if I didn't show something new to the watching heroes, I wouldn't get enough options for the internships. So, I needed to show something creative enough with my quirk, and that would net me an instant win without me having to be lethal. What could I do? At that moment of need, some memories from my previous life made their way to the forefront of my mind. No, I wasn't some military guy who watched anime or something. That'd be an obvious Deus Ex Machina out of this situation. No. What I remembered was the One Piece anime. Or more specifically, the Marineford arc, Ace, Fire Bullets. Could I make air bullets? Well, why not try? I hadn't tried to create air weapons so far simply because I thought it'd be difficult. And I was lazy. No change in personality, even if reincarnation, remember. I held up my finger towards Takoyami, who still hadn't moved from his place, created a sharp column of air, roughly the shape of a rifle bullet, and shot it, in pretty much a similar fashion. The effect was instantaneous. The air bullet hit him in the shoulder, and with enough force to make him take a step back. A look of horrified disbelief crossed his features for just a split second before he dug his feet in the ground and gave himself a more solid foundation, this time definitely intent on getting me. But his worst mistake was still there. He still hadn't moved from his place. I could only chalk it up to his confidence that he would put me out of commission before I could get him another time. Well, too bad for him. I was fairly sure I had put a significant amount of power behind that bullet when I had shot it, and it had managed to just make him take a step back, instead of throwing him off his feet like I had wanted it to. Perhaps the size of the air missile I created mattered as well. The only way to know was to create one. This time, I made a javelin pole of some length. I wasn't aware of the exact length, and waited till Dark Shadow came at me again. As soon as it did and I dodged, I took an aim and threw the air spear at Takoyami. I took extreme care to remove all air in the javelin's path, so that it shot as straight as it would if it were in space without any gravitational impact on it. It shot straight as a bullet, and actually pierced right through the center of Takoyami's torso. I watched, horrified, as Takoyami fell, blood shooting through the newly made hole in his body. Oh shit. I ran towards him, not caring about the match. I didn't mind losing since I didn't aim to be a hero to begin with. What I did mind was having the guilt of an accidental murder on my conscience. I was not a murderer. I was not a violent psychopath. Dark Shadow had already returned within Takoyami by the time I reached him. A quick look over told me that my attack had not punctured his lungs. In fact, it just barely missed doing so. I could guess that it hit one of the ribs and dissipated. Are you okay? I helped Takoyami up slowly, as he seemed to be trying to do so. He glanced at the hole in his body, breathing and sweating heavily. What did you do? He rasped out. Just an experiment gone wrong. You guys should take more care when fighting each other. Both of us looked up to see Recovery Girl standing over us, her face a grim expression. She bent down and kissed the hole. In front of our eyes, the hole sealed up and Takoyami instantly felt and looked 100 times better. Thank you, I breathed out in relief as I helped up Takoyami. I wasn't prepared for my attack to be that lethal. You were experimenting with your quirk mid-battle? Midnight asked in disbelief. I hadn't even realized she had walked up to us. I simply breathed in and out a couple more times before replying. Yeah, I hadn't tried it before, and it only occurred to me when I was fighting. I turned towards Takoyami and bowed. I am honest to goodness sorry, Takoyami. I should have been way more careful with my quirk usage. Takoyami looked uncomfortable at my heartfelt apology. He held up his hand and cleared his throat. It's fine, Korai. Mistakes happen. I'm sure you will handle the darkness of your quirk better with this experience. I gave him a wry smile. I'm fairly sure it couldn't have been called a mistake if you had died. It was a dangerous move, no matter what the final outcome would have been. Now, go, you two, Midnight said, lightly pushing us towards our respective gates. The next match needs to be started soon. I looked up at her in surprise. Already? I thought we'd have to fight again. Only if you tied, the hero clarified. It was your win. Despite me accidentally almost killing my classmate. It was accidental. And everyone who enrolls in UA is assumed to be self-driven enough to learn from such experiences. It's what freestyle education is all about. I dumbly nodded before making my way out, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened in the last few minutes. I was definitely going to need an hour or two to wind down from the adrenaline and the stress. Instead of going to the stands, I chose to sit in a seat in the corridor leading to them. It was quiet since everyone was watching the fest, so I'd have enough time to process what had happened and what I could do to prevent it from happening again. But of course, fate had other plans. There you are. I looked up from my thoughts and saw Endeavor there, looked at me like a stepping stone. That was probably closer to the truth than I thought. And I'd learned that in the next few minutes. I gave him a tired look. Is there anything I could do for the second-ranked hero? Don't give me lip, runt, the hero said in his usual condescending tone. The way you use your quirk is quite dangerous against villains. I know that, I snapped back, annoyed. That's why I wanted to avoid it in the first place. Now, what do you want, mister? My boy, Shoto. He has a duty to surpass All Might. His match against you will. I was gaping at him. Why did I have to match against Todoroki? What is that bullshit? So, give it your all. I shook myself from my reverie and stared at him in disbelief. You want me to go all out against your own son despite knowing how dangerous my quirk can be? If he can't even climb a single step like you, how will he be able to climb the mountain that is All Might? He fed as if he had made his point. That's all I have to say. Sorry for my bluntness. I stared at his retreating figure with sheer disgust in me. I knew he was piece of shit in the beginning, but got him. If you wanted to kill your son, why even have him in the first place? As if losing Toya wasn't enough, I decided to gamble and take a huge risk again. Endeavor, I called out, making his pause and turn back. What if I told you? A knowing smirk slowly worked its way up on my face. Your first son is alive. The mixture of emotions that crossed Endeavor's face could have sent shivers down the spine of even death. I could not put into the words the sheer amount of rage, frustration, regret, and guilt that showed up in his face. But even those paled in comparison to the disbelief that colored his face. Wondering how I know, I taunted, despite myself. Believe me, Endeavor, when I say I know a lot of things. You. The rage wouldn't let him speak. He stomped his way towards me, kicking me out of my funk, and make me curse myself as I ran a decent distance. Unfortunately, no distance would be safe against the number 2 hero, so all I could do was keep him within my eyesight, just in case he exploded. How do you know? An involuntary shudder ran down my spine at the fury dripping from his every word. Man, was he pissed. On second thought, I suppose I'd be pissed too if someone I barely knew or considered worth it knew something damning about me. I could see I had already done a lot of damage, so I did some more. I stuck out a tongue at the pissed man. Good luck finding out. And I ran from there towards the stands. Because no matter how pissed he would be, he would not dare to attack me directly in front of people. It'd kill his ability to reach his goal, an ability which was already hindered because of his blind greed and willful ignorance towards what makes a hero acceptable to the public. I reached my seat just as Izuku left. He waved at me as he walked away. His opponent was Mei. He was bound to win. So, instead of focusing on the match, I sat there wondering how to deal with Todoroki. He was to be my opponent, and my quirk was not really equipped to deal with his. Oh, who was I kidding? If I could make piercing air spears and javelin throw them, what's stopping me from using the air encased in ice? The only thing was that it's quirk formed ice. Will that have air too? That's what I needed to find out. If there was air, I was going to be pretty safe from Todoroki anyway. If there wasn't, well, I had to find something else to defeat him. I could be fairly sure he had some way to counter my suffocation method of dealing with him. I blankly watched the matches happening in front of me as I let my brain run a mile a minute to come up with something. Yo, I grinned lazily at the half-and-half bastard trying to emulate the copy ninja. It was hard though, trying to look aloof and cool. Todoroki, being himself, said and did nothing. I was pretty disappointed. Midnight flagged us off and Todoroki started with his massive wave of ice. I, too, started with a massive wave of air. I compressed air in front of my wave as much as I could, while also being ready to jump out of the way. I was glad I was ready because my air wave was shit and did absolutely fucking nothing in front of the ice. I supposed I couldn't emulate that one planet in the universe with winds of 2 2000s and kmph that threw everything sideways. I had hoped the power would be enough to break the ice, but breaking a bulk like that ain't easy. So, as I jumped, I removed the air around Todoroki in a snap, and way faster than I usually would. Todoroki stopped in his tracks, holding his throat in pain as the lack of air pressure started crushing his lungs from the inside. I swiftly closed the distance before releasing the vacuum bubble. Todoroki breathed in deeply, only to have to cough it all out as my fist landed in his stomach. A compressed air sphere that I had at the end of my fist exploded and threw him off his feet. I was ready to see him fall out of the ring. But you wouldn't be in UA without considerable skill. I was not particularly surprised when I saw him create an ice sculpture to stop himself. And very fortunately for him, his ice did not have air in it, so I couldn't fuck with him. But that didn't mean I couldn't hurt him. I caught him in a bubble again, but this time, I did it the opposite way. I forced air into his lungs and bloated his chest from inside. Seeing him bloated like that made it very queasy for me, and very painful for him. The way his torso ballooned up in an inhuman way. Ugh. I only did it long enough so that I could push him down and out of the ring. The moment I did that, I released my quirk and let him go back to normal. He threw up and coughed out some blood, but looked otherwise unharmed. Externally anyway. Looking at him heaving though, I wondered what I really meant by unharmed. Or had I just broken the definition of unharmed? I chuckled to myself at the thought. As I walked away from the bedridden Todoroki, I wondered about what would happen from now on. There were so many factors that were going to be influenced due to the changes of the performances in the sports festival. All for One and the league were watching, the internship locations for everyone, and even the stain stuff. I would have to think about it. You're crazy, Mina shouted the moment I appeared in her vision. How'd you manage to not freeze against him? Are you really asking me that? I asked her, amused. Of course. Todoroki has always managed to make his moves count. Well, have you ever wondered how it feels like having your breath taken away? Quite literally at that. Did you have to word it that way? Momo asked from where she was, her smile adorning her face. I grinned back as I took my place beside her. What do you think? I think there was some innuendo there, she replied as prim and proper as she could. I say that from experience, you know? Oh, and what sort of experience is this? Mina asked, evidently listening to us talk. In fact, who is the lucky one? I smiled, and rather shamelessly pointed at Momo. Momo slapped my hand away, looking red in the face. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't. At length, she simply looked away, flushing. Mina, on the other hand, reacted quite predictably. She giggled giddily and sent me a knowing glance before having her attention grabbed by Present Mike announcing the next match. I simply shook my head at her actions and let my mind be occupied with the matches to come. The next match ended up being Izuku against Bakugo. Damn. Izuku had my condolences. In the end, things proceeded as per my expectation for the most part. Once the initial matches were done, I could pretty much predict who would win against whom, and what the finals matchup would be. As it was, my next and last match ended up against Bakugo. Really, I hated fate at times. Because, if I recalled correctly, this would be the time when Ida would learn about his brother's fate. And there was nothing I could do to avoid the situation. Well, unless the police had already pulled some strings under Namasa's direction. But I wouldn't find that out until later, after this tournament would end. I had a feeling that things would be much different this time around. Oh, who was I kidding? I knew things would be different simply because I had made them aware of the lurking killer. I was fairly sure Ida's brother would be safe. As the two of us waited for midnight to flag the start of the match, I warily eyed Bakugo. He stood ready, his muscles tense, his arms already lightly sweaty from the heat inside the stadium. It was a hot day and Bakugo clearly had the elements on his side. I idly wondered if I should really take him on when he was at his strongest. Clearly, he held me in some respect given that he knew I was capable and strong, and that I had beaten Todoroki pretty damn easily. But really, why should I suffer? The moment midnight declared the start of the match, I turned and ran out of the ring right as Bakugo launched himself at me. As soon as I ran out, I turned back and almost laughed at the gaping expression he had on his face. My laughter was short-lived though, as he immediately reverted back to his default state and came at me anyway, mouthing off words that would make even the stoic Todoroki blush. Thankfully for me, Cementos was very empathetic and shielded me from the worst of the impact, even as I ran further away. Before I left the stadium though, I turned back to Midnight and screamed, I forfeit. I mean, it would have been pretty terrible to not at least clarify what my plan was. Being completely honest though, the approaching events worried me a bit more than what I'd like. I had come to care for the people in this universe after all. I was quite surprised to see Ida still present at the tournament. I wasn't sure why though, given that I already knew things would be different this time around. Were Nezu and company changing things in a controlled manner? Hey Ida, I called out to him as I reached them. I thought you wouldn't be here, I stated rather bluntly. Ida looked at me like I had just grown 3 heads. Why would you think that? I saw you pick up a call when I was down there. Oh, that was my brother, he replied, his face lighting up. He was congratulating me on making far enough in the tournament. Wait a second there, airy bastard. I turned around to see Bakugo making his way towards me, his face a mask no, a volcano of anger. What's the big idea of running out of the fight? I lightly laughed. I had no intention of getting burnt. I knew I'd lose anyway, so there wasn't any point in fighting. That means nothing to me. Fight me like a man. No. Before the situation could escalate any further, a pink gas made its way into Bakugo's nose and conked him out. I looked up as I pinched my nose close. Midnight stood there, looking at Bakugo, her face a bit bothered. I kinda expected this, so I'm glad I came to check. Kirishima and Kaminari held up Bakugo and placed him in one of our seats while Midnight talked to someone on her phone. When she was done, she beckoned me over. Let's go. You need to be ready for the award ceremony. She then turned towards Kirishima, who was nearest her. And please bring Bakugo along as well. The winner must be there at any cost. Right now. Right now. The four of us walked after Midnight. Midnight kept her usual pace, but the four of us, me, and Kirishima and Kaminari with Bakugo, were slower. I mean, we knew we had to get to the stadium, so I matched my pace with the other two who were carrying Bakugo. How do you think he will react when he wakes up? I asked the two curiously. I really wanted to know what Kirishima would say. He'll probably be all like, fight me, bastard. Kaminari responded with an awkward chuckle. He seems to particularly hate you. Nah, Kirishima stated with a shake of his head. He's just prideful and wants a clear result. I imagine he won't be happy with the situation itself, rather than being pissed at Haru. I blinked in surprise at the accuracy of the answer. Kirishima was a complete bro. Bakugo should be thankful, really. After the awards ceremony was done, Bakugo, acting the exact same way as in canon, I made my way to the principal's office. I was pleasantly surprised to see Tsukachi and All Might already there with Nezu. Ah, welcome, Korai-kun, the principal said, beckoning me over with his stubby arms. We were just about to call you for another discussion. I chuckled at his words. As if the last week wasn't enough. It wasn't, the rat replied to my words seriously. We still had to take precautions before we fully believed you. Now, with what has happened with Stain, I think it's fair to say you know your stuff. So, you still didn't believe me? I wasn't sure if I should be relieved or pissed. To think they didn't believe me when I told them everything, and still being glad that they didn't take everything I said at face value. Just because you know someone exists, someone that shouldn't be public knowledge, doesn't mean that everything you say is going to be taken true, Nezu said in his infinite wisdom. That said, we had to take some actions on the off chance what you were saying was true. Actions that, for example, prevented Ingenium's casualty. Exactly. I huffed in muted annoyance. To think I was making such a big deal out of it. I sighed and cocked my head towards them. And what did you want to discuss with me? Nezu, instead of answering, beckoned me over to one of the empty seats across his desk. I conceded to his unspoken request and took my seat in front of him, between All Might and the detective. So, we were thinking we should take the drop on the Yakuza and get rid of the Quirk erasing bullets right away. Oh my godly lordly fuck, I cursed in my mind. At least, lead up to that dramatically like you always do, you godforsaken rat. Stop dropping bombs on me like that. Judging from your expression, you don't like the idea, the godforsaken rat mused aloud, eyeing me. I sighed. It's not that I don't like the idea so much as how you just dropped that on me like it was nothing. I paused for a moment. Whatever made you decide that? It's by far the biggest threat to the people, the principal replied easily. And perhaps, the riskiest affair if left alone. We want to stop it from being developed at all. Easier said than done, I said at his rather understandable reason. I could see that Quirk erasure would break the world norms as we knew them if the idea got out. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how the erasing works. All I know is that that little girl, Eri's blood is used. And overhauls Quirk makes it really easy to have pretty much an infinite supply of blood. That's something I want to understand, Sakachi cut in at my last statement. How does the Quirk work? You said that its ability is to disassemble and reassemble things. That doesn't explain where he gets the extra matter from to replace the blood he has used. It doesn't make sense. I shrugged helplessly. Don't ask me about something I haven't researched myself. All I told you was that how the Quirk works, what Chisaki hates, and where his Quirk factor lies, so that we can deal with him. Honestly speaking, I want to research his Quirk myself. But that's impossible given his pride, his ambition, his goals and his determination to achieve those goals. It's pretty saddening, really. Sakachi sighed at my words before muttering something under his breath, as he chose to glare at the table in front of him. He probably didn't like the idea that he would have to work on half-assed information, something he could very well be terminated for were he to be wrong. I turned back to Nezu. And there's also the fact that even the small amount of actions that we have done are going to have quite the butterfly effect. Nezu sent me an interested look. And what's the effect you're seeing? I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, thoughtful. Well, let me list it one by one, I said slowly as I articulated what I was thinking. Firstly, Stain is already captured, so he won't have as much impact on things out there. There won't be enough people supporting his ideology because no one has heard it. Also, this means that the League of Villains team changes from what I know. Secondly, my presence has changed the outcome of our tournament, so the internships will probably be different, far different than what they could be. I'm not sure how much and in what way it will change the future, but I know it will change it a lot. Thirdly, the USG attack being a failure leads to two major outcomes. One is that it changes how the League will work from now on, and two, it told the League that us heroes knew about their attack. It will change their MO in the future. Fourthly, Shigaraki won't take the loss lying down. I expect more brutal and direct attacks from them from now on given how much of a man-child he is. Fifth, the Namu manufacturing will probably be sped up as well as training Shigaraki to be all for one's replacement. I imagine they will err on the side of caution and make sure things are in place, if in case us heroes do know about all of their activities. And all this is something I see just off the top of my head. There's definitely going to be other minor changes that will affect the outcomes in the grand scheme of things. With every point I listed, I could see the clouds on their faces darkening. Once I was done speaking, All Might sighed in exasperation. We thought we were doing minor changes, but apparently, the changes we have done are too much to predict things from now on. That's why I think it might be a good idea to ignore the Yakuza for now, I replied, gears turning in my brain. And why's that? I thought you'd wanted to save the little girl? Nezu asked curiously. He didn't betray how he felt about the implications of my statement. I want to really, I replied, internally regretting how apathetic my words sounded. It's just that having some Quirk erasing bullets on our side would be massively helpful in dealing with quirks like Chisaki's and Tamura's. Sadly, I don't know of a way we can create those without letting the Yakuza abuse Eri long enough for them to develop it, and then for us to reverse engineer it without having to rely on Eri's quirk or blood. If you have any tips, we can take a call and decide when to disassemble the Yakuza. It would be logically speaking a good idea, Sakachi conceded after some internal debate on my idea. But I can't bear to think what the poor girl is feeling right now. I want to act, but acting on the sparse information we have is dangerous. Well, we have to make a decision, I said wisely. It's either we wait and see, or we act and suffer the consequences. It's our choice to make. You'll be coming up with your hero names. Ah shit. I completely forgot about that. I hadn't thought of a hero name for myself. I was under the impression that I'd never need a name since I wasn't aiming to be a famous hero. But I completely forgot about this particular class. As I racked my brains wondering what I could make do with during my short tenure at the school, Aizawa projected pro-draft pick numbers for the class. I was quite unsurprised to see Bakugo and Todoroki at the top. They had performed the most flashily, and with certain confidence in their moves that the others lacked. What surprised me more was seeing Yamomo, Takoyami and myself as the next three with almost equal breakup. We all had close to 500 each, which was surprising given the fact that all of us didn't exactly perform in a way that brought attention to us. Well, I didn't. Not sure about the other two. You'll have a chance to work alongside the pros, Aizawa ended, with me having ignored most of his words. I didn't remember them, but I doubted they were relevant enough for me to remember to begin with. Not long after midnight entered, her voice strongly cutting off Aizawa. The name you pick now may be what the world ends up calling you, she announced, her entire body language quite professional despite her rather suggestive outfit. An outfit that didn't leave a lot to imagination. I could only fathom the depths of her confidence given how normally she acted in that hero outfit of hers. King Explosion Murder. I burst out laughing at Bakugo despite having expected it. It was so ridiculously funny when seeing in person than on a screen. Others looked at me in surprise before joining me with muted chuckles, evidently prepared for an outburst from Bakugo. Bakugo didn't disappoint. You got a good name then, ya airy bastard? For you. Yes, I replied honestly, but still with a smile on my face. It served to infuriate the walking talking TNT further. You could choose this. I quickly wrote the name that would become his future alias. The TNT hero, Dynamite. Seeing the die in the name definitely hit the funny bone of many of my classmates with Kaminari and Mainta openly snickering. Bakugo, of course, would have responded in kind, if not for Midnight's presence. He ended up clenching his fists tight enough that he cracked the pad which he had in one of his hands. I only chuckled humorously before taking the chance to present my own name. This will be me, I said, revealing the name I had chosen. The cooling hero, Erkin. I knew it, Kaminari exclaimed, making me jump. He instantly turned towards Mina, who was pouting. Out with it, Ashido. She glared at Kaminari for a moment before handing over a couple of bills to him. She then stuck out her tongue at me. You suck, Haru. You could have chosen a better name. You guys were betting on my choice of name? I asked incredulously. Was I becoming that predictable? We were discussing when you were with Nezu-sensei, Kaminari explained. The discussion heated up, and we ended up betting that you would choose either Erkin or something else. It was a landslide win. And how many bet on Erkin? Everyone except for Mina, Mainta, and Kirishima. Yes, I was becoming predictable. Well, only for now, I could say with some certainty. Things were going to change pretty soon. Because I was not going to be able to predict anything from now on. I was extremely surprised to see a research institute appropriately called the Shield Quirk Research Unit having picked me. I did not know non-hero institutes were also allowed to pick students. Students from hero course, that is. I also couldn't help but feel fate at work here. Shield Quirk Research. If that wasn't a hint, I wasn't sure what was. There was no way I would be in the same timeline as Izuku. And an obviously David Shield Institute chooses me. And that I'd be friends with the exact same batch of 1A, and Nezu and company would believe me so easily, and so on. It was way too much to be a coincidence. But who gives a shit? I had no real reason to think that much over this. I easily chose TSQRU. It was my aim from the beginning ever since I was born into this world. And no matter how much I liked this world, and these people, I didn't love them so much that I'd kill my personal growth for them. My name wasn't Midoriya Izuku, and I wasn't the MC. Grinning to myself at the awesome 1 week I was going to have, I glanced around. Some people still looked like they were figuring it out. Others looked like they had already chosen. And still others seemed to have given up altogether. I noticed a distinct lack of Izuku. Looking for someone, Shoji asked from ahead of me. Just wondering where Izuku disappeared, I replied, glancing in the direction of his seat. All Might was looking for him, the ever-energetic Mina replied as she whizzed by. I needed to know no more. Given the context, this was going to be his introduction to Gran Torino, and a much-needed boost to his motivation to be a hero. Gran Torino was one mean old man after all. For the time being, I decided to focus on what I could do with the opportunity that had dropped itself in my lap. I approached Momo. Hey Momo, you know about this institute? The Shield name is famous enough. When Momo looked at the name, she gasped aloud, attracting others' attention. What happened? Mina asked as she approached us. Behind her, her friend's circle followed, curious as well. Haru got picked by the Sri, she exclaimed, disbelief and awe evident in her voice. They rarely, if ever, pick anyone from the hero class. Perhaps they found out I wanted to research quirks in the future, I said jokingly, even as my brain churned the information Momo shared. After all, I wasn't expecting it to be such a big deal. Also, Sri. Shield Research Institute, Momo replied. It's an abbreviation since saying TSQRU is quite the mouthful. So that was a thing too, huh? Another stray thought made its way into my mind. Say Momo, I said tentatively. You wouldn't happen to have a contact in Sri, would you? So I could ask about the pick. Father might, Momo replied without hesitation. I will ask him for you. Please. And that was that. Given how Momo was, I could safely say I was going to be talking with someone way high up the ladder than what was the norm. I would have to prepare some nice questions so that that person would remember me. It will be super helpful in the future when I would want to climb up the ladder or start a separate firm, depending on how things would pan out. On another note, I just realized that the Hasu City incident with Stain and the top 3 of the class wouldn't happen this time around. First, because the top 3 were different, and second, Stain was in prison. He would probably stay there. His quirk was pretty weak in terms of physical strength. The problem with League of Villains. Originally, they would be there at Hasu with Stain. But Stain was out, and their Usti attack ended up in failure. So, they would either be more careful or strike at a more opportune moment. Also, Ida wouldn't be at Hasu. Well, he could be since his brother would be there. My brain hurt from considering so many possibilities. It was a matter of life and death after all, even if the people concerned were unaware of the danger. Knowing the future was not fun. It was a huge burden since every single action changed it. Something on your mind? I glanced at Ojiro, who had asked me the question. Yeah, can't share though. A major pain in the ass, it is. I decided to talk with Nezu first. His brain definitely was better than mine when conjuring up and considering possibilities and probabilities. Something serious again? Nezu asked, his eyes shrewd as he beckoned me inside his office. Sort of, I replied as I sat down in front of him. Things will change drastically from now on. Still, I figured I should come along and remind you what the next incident is supposed to be. Hasu City, yes? Yes. I explained to him my thoughts regarding the changes involved. And now, I'm not sure what exactly is going to happen. It's a good thing you came to me then, Nezu said as patiently as always. We've got just the right person. I waited for the name, but both of us stayed silent. At length, I spoke. And he is. That's confidential, the ever-infuriating rat replied. I glared at him. At this point, I'm pretty sure I should be in the know. Some things are meant to stay confidential for everyone. Oh, got him it. Fine. I'll probably figure it out anyway later on. You will. What happened? Just Nezu being an infuriating little shit. Haru. I stared at Momo and Shoji, both of whom were looking at me shocked. What? How could you call Nezu-sensei that? You'd too if you were in my shoes. Oh, come on, he can't be that bad. I looked both of them in the eye, before an involuntary chuckle escaped me. If only you knew. If only. I could only sigh to myself as I let go of the unreasonable anger. Being angry was not going to help me in any way. What I should be concerned about was how All for One would react. After the failure of Us's attack, someone like him, who had been preparing to attack for decades, would be more wary and careful about his next attack. He wouldn't let Tamura go all out or destroy his Nomus without getting something out of it. Haru? I blinked in surprise before looking up at Momo. What? She seemed to be blushing. You have been staring at my chest for quite some time. Is there something wrong? For a moment, I was reflexively about to apologize. But then my brain caught up and decided there was nothing to lose. A coy smile made its way on my face. I appreciate beauty when it's staring me in the face, you know. God. I cringed hard internally at the corny-ass line. What the fuck, brain? Shoji could only shake his head in disbelief. Momo simply gave me a weird glance before looking away, her blush fading. Okay, fine, I had spaced out, I admitted without protest. I wanted to be known as a romantic, not as a weirdo. I was just thinking about what I'd do in my internship. Didn't realize I was staring. I'm sorry. Oh, it's fine. She seemed visibly relieved after my admission of truth. It was just a bit awkward. Just a bit? I asked humorously, a smile on my face. So, you'd have been fine at some point. Her blush returned as she pouted at me. That's not what I meant, and you know that. I laughed. Yeah, I know. I suppose it'd have been fine if we had been dating. Perhaps. There was a bit of silence between the three of us, as we all sat lost in thought. At length, Shoji broke the silence. So, which agencies have you chosen? Yaoyorozu. Haru, I know, is going with Sri. Let me guess for both of you, I exclaimed before Momo could get a word in. The two exchanged glances before nodding. All right. I made an exaggerated display of humming and hawing. I already knew who would they be, of course, but I wanted to see if the reality has changed already or not. At length, I stated, Gang Orca for Shoji, and Uwabami for Momo. No way. You're right, both exclaimed in surprise. How did you figure it out? I shrugged. I just felt like that'd be a good fit. No real thought behind that. You're lying, Shoji stated bluntly. There was definitely some thinking involved that you aren't telling us. Can't tell you for real, I said. I mean, Nezu and company were an exceptional case, being teachers and all. I couldn't tell the truth to my classmates though. They'd never believe me. Simply because the idea was way too ridiculous. Thankfully for me, Momo's phone dinged at that time. She checked it and tapped a few times. Then, my phone dinged. There you go, she said, putting away her phone. Your contact in Sri. Already? I asked in disbelief as I pulled my phone out. Don't underestimate our connections. I would never. But this is still ridiculous. I mean, it's been barely 3 hours. I checked the contact she had sent before gaping at her again. And you sent me the fucking CO's contact. Would he even listen to me? He will, she replied without hesitation. Father has already talked with him. I'd say he's just waiting for your call. That's straight up unbelievable. She gave me a knowing smile. Why don't you try calling first? Oh, you bet I will. Right now. Right now.